Beneath the Magical Aurora, a cozy tale of friendship and wonder. The day had started like any other adventure, but something in the air felt different this time. It was as if the forest itself knew that today would not unfold as the others had. The group of hikers, gathered at the edge of the snowy wilderness, stared up at the towering trees that stretched like dark spires into the gray sky. They could hear the soft whispers of the wind rustling through the branches, the first few flakes of snow drifting lazily to the ground, but it was the stillness of the forest that unnerved them most. There was no sound of birds, no rustle of animals moving through the underbrush. Only an oppressive quiet that hung over the landscape like a heavy cloak. Their breath emerged in frosty clouds, puffing into the cold air with every exhale. Each hiker wrapped themselves tighter in their layers of clothing, their boots sinking into the soft, powdery snow with every step they took. The cold wasn't biting just yet, but it was only a matter of time. As they started off along the narrow trail, the group moved together in a tight formation, trying to stay close to the guide, a wiry man who appeared perfectly at home in the wilderness despite his lean build. His face, sharp and weathered by the harsh elements, was set in a determined expression, his eyes scanning the path ahead with practiced precision. He was the kind of man who exuded quiet confidence, though there was something in the way he moved that made the others uneasy. It wasn't the air of expertise that made him stand out. It was the way he seemed so completely in tune with his surroundings, as if the forest whispered its secrets only to him. "Stick close. We don't want to lose anyone out here," the guide called, his voice loud and strong, slicing through the thick silence of the woods. The sound seemed to dissipate quickly, swallowed up by the vastness of the trees, but it was enough to rouse the hikers from their momentary daze. It had been a long time since any of them had stepped into the heart of a forest like this, so wild and untamed. Their pace was slower than they had expected, the deep snow making every step more laborious. But still, they pressed on, the distant horizon just barely visible through the thick curtain of snowflakes that had begun to fall heavier as they moved further into the forest. The trees stood like giants in the distance, their skeletal limbs heavy with snow, casting long, sharp shadows that seemed to stretch further into the woods with every step. The feeling of being watched was subtle but undeniable, a creeping sensation that seemed to follow them from the moment they entered the forest. Every now and then, a branch would creak, a snap of a twig breaking the stillness of the air. At first, the hikers thought little of it. A bird, perhaps, or a squirrel scurrying through the underbrush. But then, the sounds grew more pronounced, more deliberate. A faint rustle in the bushes, the echo of a twig snapping underfoot far too loud for comfort. Each noise seemed to send a ripple of tension through the group, the hikers glancing nervously at each other as if waiting for someone else to voice the growing concern. But no one did. No one dared. The path grew narrower with each step, the snow deepening, the trees closing in on either side like a tunnel, casting the group in shadow. The wind picked up, biting at their exposed skin, sending shivers through their bodies. It wasn't just cold, it was a penetrating chill, the kind that settled deep into the bones and refused to leave. The farther they went, the more the world seemed to blur, the boundaries of the forest growing indistinct as the snow began to fall in heavier, faster flakes, until it felt as though the entire world was being swallowed by white. "Don't stray from the path," the guide warned again, his voice cutting through the flurry of snowflakes. His words weren't new, but they had taken on a deeper urgency. "The forest out here is deceptively vast. One wrong turn, and you'll be lost. And the snow. It's easy to forget where you've been." The hikers nodded, instinctively pulling closer to one another. Some were experienced, others had never stepped foot in such an environment before, but they all felt the tension in the air. It wasn't just the cold. It was something else. A quiet, unspoken knowledge that things were not as they appeared. It was the way the trees bent toward them, their branches laden with snow, heavy as though they had been waiting for something, or someone to arrive. It was the way the forest seemed to close in around them, its vastness shrinking with every step they took. And then, there was the guide. His footsteps were precise, almost calculated. The way he moved through the snow was fluid, as though he were gliding over it rather than walking. His eyes, scanning the woods with a sharpness that made the others feel like they were being dissected, never lingered on any one person. He led the group with unshakable confidence, but there was a strange unease about him, a quiet urgency that none of the hikers could quite place. He had mentioned their destination earlier, but the farther they went, the more the name of their goal seemed to slip from their minds, replaced by a growing curiosity about what lay in the depths of the woods. What was it that drew him here, year after year? Why did he seem to know this place so intimately? "Keep moving," he said again, this time louder, his voice firm and commanding. "We're not far now." The hikers felt the shift then, the subtle shift in the atmosphere, like the forest itself had just exhaled. The trees, which had seemed so distant and indifferent before, now felt alive, as if they were leaning in, listening intently to the sound of the group's movement. The wind seemed to pick up, howling through the branches above, sending a shiver down each of their spines. The snow fell faster, the flakes swirling in unpredictable gusts, blurring the path ahead. The distant mountains, once a clear silhouette against the sky, were now barely visible, the whiteout threatening to swallow them whole. The feeling of being watched was no longer subtle. It was palpable, pressing down on them from all sides. They were no longer just hikers on a trail. They were intruders in a place that didn't want them there. It was as though the forest itself was alive, watching, waiting for something, waiting for them. The guide did not hesitate. He moved forward, his pace quickening, his breath a steady rhythm in the quiet of the snow. The group followed reluctantly, their instincts screaming to stop, to turn back, but they said nothing. The path was growing steeper now, the snow deeper, the forest denser, and the oppressive weight of the wilderness around them was beginning to feel suffocating. They pressed on, each step heavier than the last, but none of them could shake the sense that they were not just walking through the forest, they were being drawn in. And with every step they took, they grew closer to something. Something waiting in the heart of the snow. "Wolves aren't the only thing that might get you out here," the guide had joked, but the words hung in the air longer than they should have, carrying an edge that made Ella's skin prickle. It wasn't the kind of joke that would be made around a campfire, with the crackle of flames and the warmth of familiarity. No, this was a different kind of humor, a dry, almost foreboding remark that seemed to cut through the air like the cold wind itself. Ella tried to shake off the uneasy feeling that crept up her spine. It wasn't like she hadn't been on hikes before, or that she was unfamiliar with the rugged beauty of the wilderness. She had braved trails that wound through mountains, crossed rivers, and hiked through forests just as remote. But this felt different. The silence was heavier, the shadows deeper. There was a strange stillness to the forest around them, as though the world had fallen silent in anticipation. The trees stood tall and imposing, their branches heavy with the weight of snow, their shadows stretching long and dark across the snow-covered ground. The only sound was the crunch of their boots in the snow, which seemed oddly loud against the eerie quiet of the woods. Ella adjusted her scarf, pulling it tighter around her neck, as the cold started to bite harder. The wind whipped at her face, and she glanced quickly at the guide, whose back was now to them as he led them forward. There was something about the way he moved, purposeful, sure, but there was also a wariness in his steps, as if he were scanning the world around him for something just beyond the trees. She had noticed it earlier, that sense of alertness in his posture, the way he looked over his shoulder every so often, eyes darting left to right, as if expecting someone, or something, to appear from the shadows of the forest. Her breath came out in a steady stream of mist, but she couldn't shake the chill that had settled deep in her bones. She wasn't the only one who noticed it. She could see the unease in the eyes of the other hikers too, though none of them dared to voice their concerns. Everyone kept their heads down, their eyes trained on the snow beneath their feet, following the guide's lead as they trudged onward. The snow seemed to deepen with each step, the trail growing more difficult, the forest more oppressive. But none of them spoke, afraid that any word might shatter the fragile illusion of safety they had left. Ella's eyes wandered over to Leo, who was walking just ahead of her. His boots kicked up little clouds of snow as he stomped through the thick powder, and there was a carefree joy in his movements. He was like a child seeing snow for the first time, his face lit up with excitement, his cheeks flushed from the cold. He had always been the one to make light of things, to turn even the most serious situations into jokes, but Ella could see that even he wasn't entirely immune to the tension in the air. His laughter broke through the silence as he scooped up a handful of snow, packing it tightly into a bowl before tossing it into the air. "Guess we should have packed some snowshoes," he called back to her, his voice echoing slightly in the stillness, but there was an edge to it now, a hint of something forced. He wasn't as carefree as he tried to appear. Ella gave him a tight smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. She could feel the weight of the silence pressing in from all sides, and Leo's attempt at levity only made the stillness more palpable, like the pause before a storm. The trees, so still, so quiet, made it seem as if the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something. She couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was, but it felt as though the forest itself were alive, watching them, testing them, as if it knew something they didn't. She glanced back at the guide, whose figure was barely visible now in the growing distance, swallowed by the tall trees that stood like silent sentinels, marking the path ahead. Ella quickened her pace, catching up to Leo, her footsteps muffled by the snow as she walked beside him. She didn't know why she felt the need to stay close, but something about the guide's words, his joke as he called it, kept echoing in her mind. "Wolves aren't the only thing that might get you out here." She tried to focus on Leo, to push away the creeping feeling that something wasn't quite right. Leo was so full of energy, stomping around as though they were on some carefree winter outing rather than a trek through the wilderness. He was a stark contrast to the rest of the group, who were moving with more caution, their eyes flicking to every shadow, their shoulders tense. His enthusiasm seemed almost out of place, like a mask he wore to cover his own discomfort. "Hey, you okay?" she asked him, her voice sounding far more tentative than she intended. Leo glanced at her, his lips curling into that playful grin she knew all too well. But there was something in his eyes, something that wasn't quite right. "Yeah, just thinking about the last time we did something like this," he replied, the usual lightness in his tone replaced by something darker, something almost reluctant. "Feels like it's been forever, huh? The snow, the trees. Just like old times." Ella smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her heart. It was like their past adventures had been a lifetime ago, and the wilderness around them was something entirely different. This wasn't like the mountain trails in the summer, where they had hiked together for hours, laughing and joking. This was colder, harsher. There was a foreboding sense that something was watching them, waiting for them to take a wrong step. Without saying another word, Ella turned her attention back to the path ahead, focusing on the faint trail of footprints the guide had left behind. They were growing deeper now, the snow so thick that it was becoming harder to see where they had come from. She could feel the wind picking up, biting through her layers, and the tension in her chest only seemed to grow. With every step they took into the heart of the forest, the feeling that they were being watched intensified. The trees seemed closer now, pressing in around them as the wind howled through the branches above. It was almost as if the forest were closing ranks, hemming them in, pulling them deeper into its depths. Ella swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the strap of her backpack, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel the sense of excitement she'd come to expect on a hike. Instead, it was replaced by an inexplicable anxiety, a sense of dread that refused to be shaken off. The guide's words echoed again in her mind. "Wolves aren't the only thing that might get you out here." She forced herself to look away from Leo and glance ahead. There was a long stretch of snow-covered ground between them and the next bend in the trail, the trees forming dark silhouettes in the white landscape. But just for a moment, only for a fleeting moment, Ella thought she saw something in the distance. A shadow, too dark, too solid, against the backdrop of snow. "Do you ever wonder why people don't take moments like this seriously?" Ella asked, her voice carrying a hint of contemplation that didn't quite fit the light-hearted atmosphere. She slowed her pace slightly, her boots crunching softly in the snow as she glanced around the pristine wilderness. The world felt still, frozen in time, except for the steady rhythm of her own breath, visible in the crisp air, and the sound of Leo's footsteps ahead of her. There was something about the vastness of it all that made her pause. The way the trees stood like ancient guardians, their branches heavy with snow, their trunks tall and imposing. The way the mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks hidden behind a soft veil of clouds, almost as if they were watching them from afar. Ella felt a strange pull in her chest, a desire to fully absorb the moment, to take it in as it was without rushing, without distraction. But it wasn't just the scenery that had her thinking. It was the feeling that this moment, this perfect, fragile moment, was being overlooked. The sense that life was constantly moving at such a fast pace that people missed the subtle, yet profound, beauty of the world around them. It wasn't just about the snow, the forest, or the mountains. It was about the peace that came from being in a place so untouched, so pure, that it seemed almost otherworldly. It felt like the world was holding its breath, just for them. Leo, on the other hand, was charging ahead, his steps full of energy and excitement. His laughter echoed in the cold air as he flung another snowball into the air, watching it disintegrate before it hit the ground. He was living in the moment, embracing the adventure with the same carefree enthusiasm he always had. And maybe that's what made Ella's question feel so out of place. Maybe she was overthinking things again. She shook her head slightly, glancing at Leo, whose grin was wide and full of mischief. He seemed to be completely lost in the experience, oblivious to anything else. She admired that about him, his ability to see life through such an optimistic lens, to always look for the joy in the world, even when everything around him seemed to be more complicated than it appeared. Leo glanced back at her, his eyes bright with a spark of excitement, his cheeks flushed from the cold. Life's too short to be serious all the time, Elle. Look around you, this is amazing. He spread his arms wide, as if trying to capture the whole of the winter landscape in one sweeping gesture. His voice was light, full of that infectious energy that always seemed to find its way into everything he did. Ella couldn't help but smile, despite the way her heart felt heavy with thoughts she couldn't shake. Leo always had a way of turning everything into an adventure, of finding the joy in even the simplest of moments. She envied that about him. But there was still a part of her that couldn't help but feel that something was missing in his approach. He was content to just be, to experience life in all its unfiltered, spontaneous glory, but Ella needed something more. She needed meaning, depth, something to hold on to when the world felt as vast and cold as the snow around them. But don't you ever wonder about why it's amazing? Ella asked, her voice softer now, almost lost in the wind. She wasn't sure if she was asking him or herself. Leo paused for a moment, looking over his shoulder at her. For a split second, there was a flicker of something deeper in his eyes, a brief moment of recognition that perhaps he understood what she was getting at. But just as quickly, it vanished, replaced by that familiar, carefree grin. I don't know, Elle, he said, shaking his head. Maybe we're just supposed to enjoy it for what it is. If we think too hard about why things are amazing, we'll miss the point. You know? Sometimes, it's enough to just feel it. Ella thought about his words for a moment, her gaze lingering on the snowflakes drifting down from the trees, their delicate patterns dissolving the moment they touched the ground. There was something freeing about Leo's perspective, something that felt like an invitation to let go of the weight of overthinking, to embrace the rawness of experience without needing to dissect every detail. But as much as she wanted to, Ella couldn't stop herself from questioning. Her mind was always racing, always searching for meaning in everything. And in a way, she felt a little bit disconnected from Leo's easy acceptance. She envied his ability to simply exist, without the constant need to question the world around him, to search for answers that never seemed to come. She pulled her scarf tighter around her neck, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. I guess you're right, she said quietly, though a part of her still wasn't sure. Maybe she just needed to relax, to let go of the need for everything to have a deeper meaning. But it was hard, especially in a place as stark and beautiful as this. The landscape felt like a canvas, painted with the colors of winter, and Ella was determined to understand the story it was trying to tell. Leo's grin softened, and he gave a shrug. Hey, maybe you're just not built for carefree like I am. And that's okay. You're not supposed to be like me, Elle. You bring something different to the table. You're always thinking, always analyzing. And that's a good thing too. It's just, sometimes it's nice to take a break from all of it and just enjoy the ride. Ella met his gaze, her smile returning, though she wasn't sure she believed everything he said. Still, the way he had said it, so casually, so genuinely, made her feel like she was at least allowed to be herself, even if she didn't always fit into the same mold. She let out a small laugh, shaking her head. I guess I could use a little more of that carefree in my life. Leo's grin returned in full force. "There's plenty of snow for that, Elle," he said, winking at her before taking off ahead, his laughter ringing through the forest once more. It was amazing. The snow glittered like fairy dust, each flake catching the light in 1,000 different ways as it drifted gently to the ground, coating the world in a soft, otherworldly glow. The air was so crisp and cold, it felt as though it could freeze time itself. Everywhere Ella looked, there was beauty, untouched, pristine, and surreal. The trees stood like ancient sentinels, their bare branches dusted with snow, their shadows long and mysterious in the fading light of afternoon. The silence was profound, only broken by the occasional sound of boots crunching through the snow or the distant call of a bird. A faraway reminder that this wilderness was full of life, even in the deepest winter. But above it all, the sky was the most captivating of all. The auroras, those dancing ribbons of green and purple, spread like an ethereal painting across the heavens. They shifted and swirled, as if the night itself was alive, preparing to reveal a cosmic spectacle that would take Ella's breath away. The colors pulsed, fading in and out, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. For a moment, it felt as though the very air around them was vibrating with some ancient energy, a force too vast for her to fully comprehend, but one she could feel deep in her bones. Ella could hardly look away. The beauty was overwhelming. She was transfixed, as though every sense in her body had been heightened by the sheer magnitude of what she was witnessing. It was like standing on the edge of the world, where the earth and the sky seemed to merge into one seamless, dreamlike panorama. And yet, as stunning as it was, there was something about it that unsettled her. The more she took in the scene, the more she felt like something, or someone, was watching. It was as if the mountains themselves, ancient and formidable, were standing guard over the forest, their stone faces solemn and inscrutable. They loomed in the distance, massive and imposing, their jagged peaks sharp against the horizon. The way they towered over everything, silent and unmoving, made Ella feel small, insignificant even. The immensity of them seemed to press down on her, like an unspoken reminder of how fleeting and fragile human life truly was. The wind shifted slightly, and with it, a strange sensation washed over her. The mountain peaks, obscured by mist and shadow, seemed to shift just out of the corner of her eye. Were they moving? Or was it just the play of light and shadow, the effect of the setting sun filtering through the thick clouds? Ella blinked and shook her head, trying to clear the thoughts that had begun to creep into her mind. The mountains were just mountains, weren't they? Just immovable, timeless structures that had witnessed countless years pass by without a single change. And yet, something about them made her uneasy. The way they stood, so still, so omnipotent in their silent grandeur, almost as if they were watching over the world with a knowing gaze. There was an ancient energy to this place, something intangible, something that had endured for millennia, far beyond the reach of any human understanding. And that knowledge, that sense of something far greater than herself, stirred a mix of awe and fear within her. It was as if the mountains were alive, not in a literal sense, but in a way that was far more unsettling. They weren't just geological formations, they were the keepers of a secret, a mystery that had been hidden for so long that even the stars themselves had forgotten it. Ella shivered slightly, despite the warmth of her scarf and coat. She turned her gaze from the mountains to the sky, hoping to ground herself in the beauty of the auroras, but even the dancing lights above felt like part of this grand, unspoken narrative, the story of the earth, its ancient heart beating quietly beneath the surface. She forced herself to take a deep breath, trying to shake the feeling that was starting to grip her. The air was sharp and biting, and she inhaled deeply, hoping the cold would clear her mind. But the unease lingered. It wasn't fear exactly, but a profound sense of being small, as if she were a mere speck of dust in the vastness of the world, and the mountains, the sky, and the stars above were aware of her presence, measuring her in ways she couldn't comprehend. Ella. Leo's voice broke through her thoughts, sharp and clear against the stillness. He was standing a few paces away, his eyes scanning the horizon, the snowflakes settling gently on his shoulders. She forced a smile, trying to shake off the feeling that had settled over her. "Yeah," she responded, her voice sounding slightly off, even to her own ears. "You okay?" Leo asked, his brow furrowed with concern. He must have noticed her distant expression. Ella nodded quickly, trying to push the strange thoughts aside. "Yeah, just taking it all in." Leo gave a casual nod, clearly not sensing the undercurrent of unease that had taken root inside her. He turned back toward the mountains, his expression filled with awe as he looked up at the sky. "It's incredible, isn't it?" he said, his voice filled with wonder. Ella nodded, but her gaze once again found the peaks, looming in the distance. She couldn't shake the feeling that something in this place was older than time itself, something that had been waiting, watching. As the group stopped for a rest near a frozen stream, Ella couldn't help but notice how serene everything seemed. The air was thick with the scent of pine. The only sounds were the quiet rustling of snowflakes as they fell to the ground, and the soft gurgling of the stream as it meandered through the thick blanket of snow. The group had been walking for hours, and the exhaustion was beginning to settle in. Most of the hikers gathered near the bank of the stream, unwrapping their scarves and pulling out thermoses of hot drinks. Even the guide, who usually kept a firm pace, seemed content to let everyone take a break. But as Ella scanned the area, something caught her eye, something out of place in the otherwise perfect stillness. Her breath hitched slightly. In the distance, just beyond the edge of the trees, she saw it, a faint, winding path that seemed to shimmer in the pale light of the day, as though it were made of something other than snow and ice. The surface sparkled, glittering in a way that made it look almost as though it had been sprinkled with stardust, as if it were glowing faintly under the cover of snow. The path was narrow and winding, leading deeper into the forest, its edges not quite clear, like it was hiding itself from view. It seemed to stretch further into the trees, curving and twisting in a way that didn't look entirely natural. Ella's heart skipped a beat. The eerie glow of the path almost beckoned to her, urging her to step onto it and follow it wherever it might lead. But there was something unsettling about it too, something that tugged at the back of her mind, warning her to be careful, to be aware. She nudged Leo, who was crouching down near the frozen stream, watching the icy water flow beneath the thick layer of ice. She didn't need to say anything more. He turned immediately, following her gaze. "Look," Ella whispered, her voice barely above a breath. She pointed toward the path, her hand trembling slightly, though she wasn't sure if it was from the cold or something else. Leo squinted into the distance, his face unreadable at first. But then, a grin slowly crept across his face, the kind of mischievous grin he always wore when he spotted something that sparked his curiosity. He stood up, brushing snow off his pants, and glanced back at the group, still absorbed in their rest. They hadn't noticed the path, or if they had, they weren't paying attention. Leo raised an eyebrow. "Looks like it leads somewhere interesting," he said, his voice light and casual, as if he hadn't just spotted something as strange as a glowing, secret path in the middle of an untouched forest. Ella's heart raced, her mind trying to process what she was seeing. Was it real? Could there be some natural explanation for it? The way it shimmered so unnaturally made it hard to believe it was just the result of sunlight or ice reflecting in an ordinary way. Her instincts told her to investigate, to follow the path, but at the same time, she couldn't shake the feeling that it was a trap, something meant to draw them off course, into danger. Leo, as if reading her hesitation, took a step toward the edge of the stream. His eyes locked onto the shimmering path, and then he turned to her, his expression both serious and excited. "What do you think, Elle? We can't just let this slip by, can we?" He shrugged as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "I mean, it's not every day you see something like that out here." Ella bit her lip, her eyes still fixed on the path. She glanced back at the group, who were all too busy with their own activities to notice what was happening. Was it worth telling them? Should they stay with the group, or was this something she needed to see for herself? There was no telling what lay beyond the trees, where the path wound out of sight, but the curiosity gnawed at her. What if it led to something they weren't meant to find? Or worse, what if it was leading them into trouble? But Leo's infectious enthusiasm was hard to resist. She watched as he took another step toward the path, his eyes gleaming with excitement. He was always the one to dive headfirst into the unknown, to take the risks that others wouldn't. Maybe that was why they had clicked so well on this trip, because at the core, they were both driven by a deep curiosity. "Let's go see where it leads," Leo said with a wink, practically bouncing on his feet. Ella hesitated just a moment longer, her heart torn between caution and intrigue. The shimmer of the path seemed to pulse, as if encouraging them to follow. It was strange, and yet, she couldn't deny the pull. Maybe this was why they were here, why they had come on this trip in the first place. To step off the beaten path and experience something beyond the ordinary. She wasn't sure, but in that moment, she felt an almost irresistible urge to follow the shimmering trail. With a small nod, she agreed. "All right," she said, her voice a little unsure but filled with a sense of adventure nonetheless. "But we stick together, okay?" Leo's grin widened. "Always." And just like that, they began to walk toward the mysterious path, leaving the rest of the group behind, unaware of the secret they were about to uncover. "We're not supposed to leave the group," Ella reminded him, her voice tinged with a note of caution. She glanced back at the hikers, who were gathered around the frozen stream, chatting and laughing amongst themselves, blissfully unaware of the path that had beckoned to her. There was something undeniably tempting about the mysterious trail, something that pulled at her with an almost magnetic force. But her rational mind fought back. After all, they had a guide, a strict schedule, and an unspoken rule about staying together. The last thing they needed was to get lost or caught out here without the rest of the group. But Leo, as always, was the one to challenge the rules. He turned to face her, giving her that signature grin. The one that always meant trouble. It was a grin that said he was already a few steps ahead, already thinking of what kind of adventure they could find. His eyes sparkled with excitement, the corners of his mouth curled up in a way that made her chest tighten with both excitement and apprehension. "Come on, Elle," he said, taking a step toward her. "It'll just be a quick detour. We'll be back before anyone even notices." Ella's gaze flickered to the rest of the group again, watching as they settled into their break, unaware of the subtle shift in the air around them. The group seemed so carefree, wrapped in their own world of laughter and stories. And she was standing here, torn between two worlds, the safety of the group and the allure of the unknown. She took a deep breath, trying to center herself. Her heart was pounding. There was something in Leo's voice that made it hard to resist. His confidence was like a wave, sweeping over her, drowning out the lingering doubts. But part of her still hesitated. They were out here in the wilderness, far from civilization. No one would know where they'd gone if something happened. The guide's warning about staying close echoed in her mind. Wolves aren't the only thing that might get you out here. Was this the risk he'd meant? Was this what he had been referring to? The pull of the wild that could make even the most sensible of people act recklessly? "You know, if we get caught, it'll be a big deal," Ella said, her voice quieter now, more thoughtful. She crossed her arms, instinctively pulling her coat tighter around herself. "They might turn back or send someone looking for us. It'll mess up the whole plan." Leo scoffed lightly, a soft chuckle escaping his lips. "Ella, you worry too much." He took another step closer to her, as if closing the distance between them would somehow make the decision easier. "We've got this. No one's going to notice. Besides, think of the stories we'll have to tell when we get back. The others will be jealous. Who else is going to get to see what's at the end of this path?" His words were like a siren song, tempting her with promises of discovery, of secrets waiting to be uncovered. Ella felt a flutter in her chest, a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. The more Leo spoke, the more she felt herself being drawn to the adventure he was offering. She had to admit, part of her wanted to see where the path led. She could almost hear the call of the unknown, like an echo that reverberated deep within her. But she couldn't ignore the voice of reason, the nagging thought that something about this felt off. The path was too strange, too out of place, like it had appeared just for them. And in the back of her mind, she could still hear the guide's warning. His words had been so casual, but the undertone of them had been so serious. It wasn't like Leo to let caution dictate his actions, but she wasn't sure she could follow him down this path without second thoughts. Leo, sensing her hesitation, took a step closer, closing the final gap between them. His hand brushed lightly against her arm, his touch warm against the cold air. "Come on," he urged, his voice soft but insistent. "What's the worst that could happen? We'll go just a little way, see what's ahead, and then come back. It'll be our little secret. And if we're back before anyone notices, they'll never know we were gone." His words were so persuasive, so carefree, that Ella almost felt silly for doubting him. The idea of keeping a secret, of having something just between the two of them, was strangely thrilling. She could already picture their faces when they got back to camp, pretending they hadn't wandered off and found something the others hadn't. Her mind raced, the tension between wanting to follow Leo and knowing she should stay with the group building inside her. The snow-covered landscape before her stretched on, silent and vast, the path seeming to stretch farther into the forest than she had noticed before. It was like the trail was calling to her, tempting her to follow it, to uncover its mystery. Leo's grin softened as he watched her, his eyes full of understanding. He knew she wanted this, knew that deep down, she shared the same curiosity that had always driven him. "Come on, Elle," he said, his tone gentler now, almost coaxing. "You're not going to let a little thing like rules stop you, are you?" Ella hesitated for a moment longer, feeling the weight of the decision. Her heart raced as she glanced back one last time at the group. They were still oblivious, still laughing, still in their own little world. Then, she looked back at Leo, whose eyes were full of excitement and anticipation. There was something magnetic about his confidence, something that made her believe that they could take on anything, as long as they were together. Finally, with a deep breath, Ella nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "All right, but we're only going a little way. We are coming back, Leo." Leo grinned even wider, his eyes lighting up with the thrill of the adventure. "You won't regret it," he said, already stepping toward the shimmering path. "Let's go see what's waiting for us." And with that, they took their first steps off the beaten path, leaving behind the safety of the group and venturing into the unknown. Before Ella could protest, Leo had already started walking, his boots crunching through the snow with purpose. He didn't even look back to see if she was following. He knew she would. His confidence, that ever-present magnetism, had already made up her mind for her. With a heavy sigh, Ella adjusted the scarf around her neck and reluctantly took her first step after him, her boots sinking into the soft, powdery snow. She shot one last glance over her shoulder toward the group, who were still gathered around the stream, chatting and laughing, oblivious to the fact that she was slipping away. Part of her still wanted to turn back. They were supposed to be sticking together, keeping safe, following the rules. But the more she thought about it, the more she knew she'd regret not going with Leo. There was something in the air tonight, something wild and alluring about this mysterious path that beckoned them forward. And if she didn't go now, she'd forever wonder what might have been, what secrets lay hidden just out of reach. With a reluctant shake of her head, Ella caught up to Leo, who was moving with ease, his long strides carrying him ahead like he'd done this 100 times before. "Slow down," she called after him, though the words were more of a half-hearted protest than an actual request. Her voice seemed to dissipate in the cold air, swallowed by the vast silence of the forest. The only sounds now were the soft swish of their clothes brushing against their bodies and the rhythmic crunch of their boots sinking into the snow. Leo didn't seem to hear her. Or maybe he did, but the thrill of the unknown was too strong for him to care. He was already several paces ahead, walking with the kind of carefree energy that made Ella both irritated and envious. Why did he always have to be the one pushing boundaries? The trail seemed to pull them forward, like a current dragging them deeper into the forest. The trees loomed overhead, their branches bare and heavy with snow, creating a canopy of white that blocked out most of the moonlight. The path ahead was narrow, barely wide enough for both of them to walk side by side. Yet, Leo continued ahead, never missing a beat. It wasn't until they'd walked several yards into the forest that Ella realized just how quiet it had become. The snow beneath their boots, which had initially made a satisfying crunch with each step, now seemed to muffle their movements, as though the very earth itself was trying to hush them. The air was colder here, sharper somehow, and the usual sounds of the forest, the rustling of branches, the distant call of birds, seemed absent. Even the wind, which had been blowing through the trees when they were still near the group, had died down. The only sound now was the rhythmic pattern of their footsteps, fading as they moved further away from the others. Ella's pulse quickened, her senses on high alert. The silence was unnerving, an unnatural kind of stillness that made her feel exposed, vulnerable. She glanced nervously around, but the forest was still, not a single creature stirring in the shadows. The trail seemed to stretch on endlessly, winding deeper into the heart of the woods, the shimmering path beneath their feet almost glowing in the dim light. Leo, however, was undeterred. His pace didn't falter, and he didn't seem to notice the growing tension in the air. He was too caught up in the excitement of being somewhere new, somewhere untouched. "This is amazing, isn't it?" he called over his shoulder, his voice filled with a quiet thrill. "Look at how it sparkles. It's like we're walking on stars." Ella, however, didn't share his enthusiasm. The farther they walked, the more the air seemed to close in around them. She couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching them, the trees towering above like silent sentinels, their limbs heavy with snow. Every now and then, she thought she heard a faint crackling sound behind them, like footsteps following their own, but when she turned, there was nothing. Just the endless expanse of snow and darkened trees. "Leo," she said, her voice quieter now, more tentative. "I think we should go back. This doesn't feel right." But Leo, ever the optimist, just laughed, his voice echoing in the vast emptiness around them. "You're just getting spooked, Elle. It's fine. We're fine. Besides, it's too late to turn back now." Ella's brow furrowed as she looked at him, her unease growing. There was something almost too perfect about this moment, as if they were walking a path that had been made just for them, with no other souls to disturb the stillness. It was beautiful, but in that beauty lay a quiet danger, a sense of being somewhere you weren't meant to be. But Leo was already a few steps ahead, his breath visible in the cold air, the faint mist swirling around him. The path ahead continued to sparkle like stardust, glowing with a strange, ethereal light that seemed to guide them deeper into the heart of the wilderness. Ella hesitated for just a moment longer, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She knew she should turn back, but something in her, the same curiosity that had made her follow Leo in the first place, kept her moving forward. With a sigh, she quickened her pace to catch up. "I swear, Leo, one of these days, you're going to get us into serious trouble." Leo didn't look back, but she could hear the grin in his voice. "Maybe. But not today." And with that, the two of them pressed forward, further into the unknown, leaving behind the safety of the group and the comforting noise of the world they knew. "Leo," Ella said, her voice sharper now, a tremor of worry creeping into her words. She stopped in her tracks, her boots crunching loudly in the stillness. The snow around her seemed to amplify the sound, but the forest felt eerily quiet, like it was holding its breath. "We've gone too far. We should turn back." But Leo wasn't listening. His gaze was fixed on something ahead, his expression blank but intense. He didn't even acknowledge her words, as if they didn't matter. His body was tense, his breath coming in shallow bursts, and for the first time, Ella saw something in his eyes that made her stomach tighten. A kind of focus, like he was seeing something only he could see. "Leo," she called again, her voice now edged with panic. She took a hesitant step toward him, her heart racing in her chest. Her feet felt heavy, like the snow was sucking the warmth from her body, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The silence in the forest had deepened, almost suffocating in its intensity. She could hear the sound of her pulse thrumming in her ears, a stark contrast to the quiet stillness around them. Still, Leo didn't respond. His eyes were locked on whatever lay ahead, and for a moment, Ella felt as though she was standing on the edge of something far greater than the forest itself, something vast and unknowable. "Leo," she said again, louder this time, her voice cracking with the tension building inside her. Finally, he turned to her, his expression unreadable, as though he hadn't heard her before. "Ella, look," he said, his voice low and almost reverent, like he had just discovered something too magnificent for words. Ella followed his gaze, her breath catching in her throat. At first, she saw nothing but the dark snow-covered trees that surrounded them on all sides, the pale moonlight casting long shadows over the white expanse of the forest floor. But then, as her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she saw it, something that made her blood run cold. Just beyond the next cluster of trees, there was a clearing, and in the center of it stood an enormous stone archway. It was ancient, its surface worn by time, but still somehow imposing. The stones were covered in thick moss and ice, giving it a ghostly appearance, and faintly glowing symbols were etched into the stone, shimmering like fireflies in the darkness. The archway itself seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, as if it were alive, waiting for something. Waiting for them. Ella took a step back, her feet sinking deeper into the snow, a sense of dread rising in her chest. "What is that?" she whispered, the words barely leaving her lips. Leo didn't answer. Instead, he began walking toward it, his pace slow and deliberate, as though he were drawn to it by some invisible force. His eyes never left the archway, and for the first time, Ella saw a flicker of fear in his gaze, a fear that mirrored the unease flooding her own heart. "Leo, stop," she cried, her voice rising in desperation, but he didn't even turn to look at her. It was as if the archway had already claimed him, pulling him forward with an undeniable force. Ella felt a chill creeping up her spine, one that had nothing to do with the cold. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to get out of there before they found themselves trapped in whatever mystery the archway represented. But Leo was already too far ahead, too determined to stop. "Leo, please," she called again, but it was no use. He was too far gone. The world around her seemed to shrink, the shadows growing longer, the air colder, as if the forest itself had become hostile to their presence. The ground beneath her feet felt like it was shifting, as if the very earth was betraying them. The faint buzzing of the cymbals on the archway intensified, growing louder in her ears, filling the air with an eerie hum that made her skin crawl. Ella took a deep breath and tried to steady herself. She had to go after him. She couldn't leave him here, not like this. With a burst of adrenaline, she started after Leo, her legs moving faster than she thought possible, her heart pounding in her chest. But with each step, the archway seemed to grow further away, as though it were receding into the shadows, pulling them both into its web. "Leo!" Ella shouted, but her voice seemed lost in the cold night air, swallowed by the vastness of the forest. Every instinct told her to turn around, to return to the group and forget this strange path, but she couldn't leave him behind. Not now. When she reached the edge of the clearing, Leo had already stepped beneath the archway, his figure now framed by the glowing runes. He turned back to her, and for the first time, his eyes were wide with something else. Something Ella couldn't quite place. "Come on, Ella," he said, his voice a strange mixture of excitement and fear. "You have to see this." Ella froze, her feet rooted to the spot. The weight of his words hung in the air between them, and in that moment, she knew. Whatever lay beyond that archway, whatever secret it held, it wasn't something they were meant to uncover. But it was too late. They had crossed a line, and there was no turning back now. The clearing seemed to darken even further, and the symbols on the stone began to glow brighter, casting an otherworldly light over the scene. Ella felt her breath catch in her throat as the archway seemed to pulse, as though alive. It was waiting. And so was Leo. She followed his gaze, her breath catching in her throat as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. There, in the clearing, stood a tree unlike any she'd ever seen. At first, it seemed almost ordinary, tall, gnarled, its trunk thick with age, but then she saw the branches. They weren't like the usual dark, skeletal limbs she had expected from a tree standing alone in the snow. No, these branches were made entirely of ice, glittering, transparent ice that shimmered in the dim moonlight like polished crystal. The ice caught the light of the aurora overhead, reflecting it in a cascade of soft, otherworldly hues, green, purple, blue, and pink. It looked like something from a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. Ella's heart raced, her skin prickling with both awe and fear. The colors of the aurora danced across the ice branches, swirling in patterns she couldn't quite understand, almost as if the tree itself was alive, breathing with the rhythm of the night sky. But it wasn't just the branches that were mesmerizing. Tiny orbs of light, like flickering fireflies, hovered around the tree in a slow, graceful dance. They were delicate, like soft glows in the dark, their light pulsing and flickering, casting eerie reflections on the snow around them. The air was still, yet the orbs moved with purpose, weaving through the icy branches and around each other as if drawn by some unseen force. Ella felt as though she were seeing something sacred, something that should remain hidden from the world. The scene was beautiful, beyond anything she could have imagined, yet it was unnerving, like stepping into a place that was both ancient and timeless. The quiet seemed to deepen, pressing in on her, and for a moment, she couldn't tell if the world around her was holding its breath or if it had simply stopped altogether. A strange warmth spread through her, despite the icy chill in the air. It was a warmth that seemed to come from within, as though the tree and its glowing orbs were reaching into her, calling to her, urging her closer. But even as she felt this pull, her mind screamed in warning. This wasn't natural. This was something otherworldly, something that didn't belong in this forest, not in this place, not in this time. "What is this place?" she whispered, her voice barely audible as if speaking louder might shatter the fragile, magical atmosphere around them. Leo, still standing a few steps ahead of her, didn't seem as concerned. His gaze was fixed on the tree, a look of wonder in his eyes. "I don't know, but it's beautiful, isn't it?" His voice was hushed, filled with the kind of reverence one might give to a religious icon, as if he were encountering something sacred. Ella felt a chill creep down her spine despite the warmth of the glow. She had to admit, the sight was mesmerizing, but it felt wrong, too wrong. There was something about the way the orbs moved, almost like they were alive, not simply floating in the air, but following patterns, chasing each other with an intention. And the tree, its ice-covered branches looked almost like they were stretching toward her, as if calling her in, urging her to come closer. Her feet felt heavy, like she was stuck in place, unable to move forward. It was as if the clearing itself was holding her there, like it wanted to trap her in this dreamlike vision forever. She glanced at Leo, who was now taking another step toward the tree, his eyes wide with fascination, but Ella hesitated. She couldn't shake the feeling that they had stumbled into something they weren't meant to see. Something that wasn't just a relic of nature, but a part of something far darker and far older than either of them could understand. The more she looked at the tree, the more she realized that the beauty was just a veil, one that hid a deeper, more unsettling truth. The orbs, though graceful in their flight, had an eerie quality to them. The way they danced around the ice made Ella's chest tighten, as if she were being watched. No, as if something was waiting for them to make the wrong move. The wind picked up slightly, carrying with it the faintest whisper. It was a sound too soft to make sense of, but it was there, low, almost imperceptible, like the rustling of ancient leaves or the distant hum of a forgotten song. The words, if they were words, seemed to slip through her mind, too quick for her to grasp. But they lingered, just on the edge of her consciousness. "What is this place?" she repeated, though this time, it sounded more like a plea than a question. She felt the weight of the words, as if the answer was buried in the very air around her, but she couldn't pull it free. Leo turned slowly, finally noticing the tension in her voice. His brow furrowed, and he took a step back toward her, breaking the hypnotic pull of the tree, though his gaze lingered behind him. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice softer now, as if the reality of the situation was starting to sink in. "But it's different. There's something special about it. I can feel it." Ella shook her head, feeling the growing sense of dread inside her. "It's not right," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We shouldn't be here." The wind shifted again, a cold gust sweeping through the clearing. The orbs of light flickered and dimmed for just a moment, their glow faltering, before they began to circle faster. The branches of the tree creaked, as though in warning. And just for a brief second, Ella thought she saw something move in the shadows near the base of the tree, a dark shape, fleeting and ungraspable. She stepped back instinctively, heart pounding, her instincts screaming at her to leave. But Leo was still standing there, eyes wide, staring at the tree with an almost childlike wonder. And in that moment, she realized with a sinking feeling that whatever power this place held, Leo was already under its spell. As they approached the tree, the orbs of light seemed to grow more animated, darting closer, almost as if they were aware of their presence. It was as if the tree itself had summoned them, drawing the ethereal lights to the strangers who dared to step into its domain. Ella's breath caught in her throat as the first orb veered closer, its tiny form flickering in the cold air. For a moment, she thought it might pass by, but instead, it came to a halt right in front of her face, suspended in the air as if studying her. The orb's glow was soft yet intense, pulsing gently, like the heartbeat of something ancient and living. Its light was a strange, iridescent blue, tinted with a faint shimmer of silver, like moonlight captured in a bottle. But it wasn't just a light, Ella realized with a start. It had a shape. A form that seemed to twist and warp within the soft glow. The longer she looked at it, the more she realized that it was no simple ball of light. It had wings. At first, she thought it was just a trick of the light, but no, as the orb hovered closer, she saw it clearly. The wings were made of delicate frost, translucent but intricate, like patterns spun by frost on a windowpane, intricate and fragile. They fluttered slowly, barely moving, yet propelling the orb forward with such precision that Ella could feel the air stir as it drew nearer. The wings, though translucent and delicate, had an ethereal, almost otherworldly glow to them, as though they were formed not from ice, but from something far more ancient, something that existed beyond the physical realm. The creature, if it could be called that, seemed to shimmer with an energy that was almost hypnotic. Ella's pulse quickened, her senses on high alert. The closer it got, the more she felt drawn to it, as though some invisible thread were pulling her in, but also, an instinctive voice inside her warned her not to move any closer. She stood perfectly still, afraid that even the smallest movement might shatter the delicate, spellbound balance between them. The orb hovered just a few inches from her face now. She could see every detail in its shimmering, icy wings. Each wing was perfect in its symmetry, so fragile, yet they seemed to possess a power that Ella couldn't begin to understand. They looked like they were woven from thin strands of ice, catching the light in ways that made the wings appear to shift and change with every angle she viewed them from. The longer she stared at it, the more she felt that the light was not just light, but a message, a signal, an invitation to something she couldn't quite grasp. The creature's glow flickered once, twice, as if it were sizing her up, assessing her presence. For a brief moment, Ella thought it might speak. No, communicate with her, some silent exchange that would unlock the mysteries of this place. But it didn't. Instead, the orb's glow intensified, flashing brighter, then dimming, as though responding to something deep within her, or perhaps something within the air itself. Ella felt her breath hitch in her chest as the orb drifted even closer, the icy glow casting a strange, cool sensation against her skin. She could feel the chill from its presence, a sensation that shouldn't have been possible when it was still hanging in the air, so close but not touching her. She felt a strange, fluttering sensation in her chest as if her heart had synchronized with the pulse of the orb, as though the two were connected somehow, like some invisible thread was tethering them together. It was both mesmerizing and unnerving. The sound of Leo's voice broke through the thick, silent air. "Ella, are you okay?" he asked softly, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the orb. His words seemed so distant now, as if they were coming from the far end of a tunnel. The only thing that mattered was the orb, suspended in front of her, its frosty wings fluttering in a rhythmic motion. For a moment, Ella forgot where she was. She forgot the forest, the snow, even Leo standing just a few steps behind her. The world narrowed down to the orb and the cold beauty it embodied. A strange, magnetic pull seemed to radiate from it, and for a split second, she thought she heard a whisper, a faint voice in the wind that wasn't her own. It was a soft, melodic sound, barely audible, like a song sung from deep in the earth, but it was unmistakably there. And just as suddenly as it had appeared, the orb pulled away, flitting backward to join its companions. Ella blinked, disoriented, as the world around her seemed to snap back into focus. She could feel the cold air once more, the weight of the snow beneath her boots, the rustling of branches. But the trance-like pull lingered. She reached up to touch her face, half expecting to feel the warmth of the orb's glow still lingering on her skin. But it was gone. What the hell was that? She breathed, her voice trembling, but she couldn't help the wonder that crept into her words. What had just happened? Was it a trick of the light? A figment of her imagination? Leo, watching her intently, gave a nervous laugh. That was weird, he admitted, his voice sounding almost uncertain for the first time. But kind of beautiful, right? Ella didn't answer right away. Her mind raced, her thoughts swirling in a mix of awe, fear, and confusion. She wanted to reach out, to understand, but a voice in the back of her mind warned her not to. There was something about the way the orb had acted. Its behavior wasn't just random, it was intentional, almost like it had chosen her for a reason. And that reason felt like it might be more dangerous than she could possibly know. But she couldn't shake the feeling that the orb wasn't just a creature, it was a key. A key to unlocking something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface of this forest. Something far more ancient than they could possibly understand. This extended passage amplifies the sense of wonder and unease as Ella experiences the orb's strange behavior, deepening the mystery of the magical forest and its otherworldly inhabitants. The tension continues to build, highlighting the pull the orbs have on Ella and the growing sense of danger and fascination she feels. "They're alive," Ella said, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile moment. Her breath caught in her throat, her heart racing as the reality of what she was seeing began to settle in. The orb that had hovered before her, now joined by others, wasn't just a flickering light or an illusion. It was something real, something alive. The air around them seemed to shift, charged with a strange energy that hummed just below the surface of everything. Ella's gaze never left the creatures, her mind still trying to piece together the impossible sight before her. How could something so delicate, so fragile, be alive? How could something so ethereal, made of light and ice, hold life? Her pulse quickened, her instincts screaming that this was no ordinary moment. There was something ancient, something profound about the way these creatures moved, almost as if they were aware of their presence, of the significance of this encounter. Leo, who had been just as mesmerized, was the first to break the spell. He reached out his hand cautiously, extending it toward one of the creatures that had been fluttering nearby, its wings glowing with a faint, translucent shimmer. The moment his fingers brushed the air, the creature darted toward him. It moved in a way that was fluid, graceful, like it was gliding through the cold, crisp air, and with a single beat of its wings, it landed softly on his outstretched palm. The impact was light, almost weightless, as if the creature had no mass at all, just an essence, a presence. For a moment, neither of them moved. Leo's hand was still, trembling slightly under the delicate weight of the creature. The orb, it wasn't just a glowing sphere anymore, it had taken on form, had become something solid in a way that was hard to grasp. Its wings flickered gently, like the fluttering of a bird's feathers in the wind, the faintest chill radiating from its icy body. It was cold, yes, but it was not the harsh, biting cold of the snow around them. No, this was a more delicate cold, like the cool touch of a snowflake on the tip of your tongue or the feeling of frost spreading across your skin on a winter morning. Refreshing, almost soothing, but still powerful in its own way. Ella watched in awe, her breath caught in her chest, as Leo's fingers curled slightly, forming a protective cradle around the creature. The frost on its wings shimmered as if it were made of starlight, delicate and beautiful. She could see tiny, intricate details in the design, patterns etched into the icy wings, flowing like the tendrils of a spider's web, creating a breathtaking symmetry that was unlike anything she'd ever witnessed. It was as though the wings were not merely frozen. They were woven from something far more ancient, far more mysterious. The creature's eyes, if they could even be called eyes, were like tiny glimmering specks, so faint they could easily be mistaken for more light, but there was an undeniable intelligence behind them. They seemed to look at Leo as though they were measuring him, studying him with an intensity that made the air feel even colder. Ella took a hesitant step forward, the urge to touch the creature growing stronger with each passing moment. But she held back, mesmerized by the way it responded to Leo's touch, its wings pulsing softly as if in rhythm with his heartbeat. She could see the light from the creature's wings reflecting in his eyes, casting a surreal glow across his face. For a split second, she thought she saw a flicker of something more than just curiosity in Leo's expression. There was wonder there, yes, but also a trace of something else, something deeper. Fear, perhaps, or uncertainty, though he did his best to hide it beneath a casual smile. "It's not just light," Leo said quietly, his voice barely above a murmur. He sounded almost awestruck. His gaze was fixed on the creature, his hand steady as he let it rest on his palm, almost as if he was afraid to break the connection. The creature seemed to breathe, though Ella couldn't tell if it was truly breathing or if it was just the gentle rise and fall of the frost on its body. But there was something undeniably alive about it. Alive in a way that no earthly creature could be, something almost otherworldly, something not bound by the usual rules of nature. Ella nodded slowly, still processing the magnitude of what was happening. "It's incredible," she said softly. "But how? How is this even possible?" She took a cautious step closer, her eyes scanning the shimmering creature, as if expecting it to vanish or dissolve at any moment. But it didn't. It simply perched there, its delicate wings fluttering lightly in the cold breeze, its body absorbing the light from the trees around them, turning it into something more. Something magical. The longer she stared at it, the more she felt a strange sense of connection. A sense that she, too, was part of this place, part of something much larger than she could comprehend. The wind picked up, but the creature didn't seem to be bothered by it. In fact, it seemed to thrive in the wind, its wings catching the breeze, making it shimmer even more brightly. Ella's thoughts swirled. There was a quiet urgency building inside her, an impulse to reach out, to touch it, to understand it, to feel its life in her own hands. But she stopped herself. Something told her that touching it might change everything. Something told her that there was a price for knowing too much, for venturing too deep into the unknown. Leo broke the silence, his voice still soft, almost reverent. "Maybe it's a sign," he said, his words lingering in the air between them. "Maybe this is what we were meant to find." Ella didn't answer immediately. She wasn't sure what to say. She wasn't sure what this was, or what it meant. But she felt something. Something in the air, in the snow, in the very ground. Beneath her boots, that was telling her they had stepped into a world that didn't belong to them. A world that had been hidden, waiting. And now that they had found it, there was no going back. As the creature continued to rest on Leo's palm, Ella felt a chill creep down her spine. Not from the cold, but from the realization that they were no longer just travelers in a forest. They were intruders in something ancient, something powerful. And somehow, she knew this was only the beginning. "Do you think they're friendly?" Leo asked, his voice still a mix of awe and uncertainty, as he continued to gaze at the creature resting so gently on his palm. The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of its implications. Ella hesitated before answering, her mind still trying to process the impossibility of what they were witnessing. Were they friendly? Or were they something more? Something ancient and untouchable, waiting for the wrong move to unleash something far more dangerous? Before Ella could respond, her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden burst of movement. The tiny creatures, those glowing, ethereal beings, scattered. They zipped away from Leo's palm with a startling speed, their wings flashing like sparks in the cool evening air. Their soft, flickering glow flitted away into the trees, vanishing like fireflies at the edge of a summer night. But this wasn't a casual retreat. No, it felt different, urgent, like they were being called, pulled away from them by something far greater than the two of them standing there. Ella felt a strange pang of loss in her chest, as if she were witnessing something precious being taken from her, something she hadn't even realized she needed until it was gone. Then, the first low rumble came. It was distant at first, almost like thunder, but it didn't feel like a natural storm. It felt deeper, earth-shaking, like the very foundation of the forest was shifting. A wave of energy rippled through the air, and Ella's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the ground beneath her feet trembling, a subtle but unmistakable vibration that crawled up her legs and sent a shiver down her spine. Her eyes widened in disbelief as the trees around them seemed to sway, not in the wind, but in response to something unseen. Something that was making its presence known. Leo froze, his gaze snapping from the direction the creatures had disappeared to the ground beneath them. "What was that?" he muttered, his voice tense with a growing sense of unease. Ella's heart hammered in her chest as the rumble grew louder, now echoing through the forest with an unsettling, guttural sound that seemed to vibrate in her very bones. The tremor intensified, making the trees creak and groan as if they, too, were trying to resist something beyond their control. The sky, which had been bright with the soft glow of the aurora, seemed to darken around the edges, as if something unseen was pulling the light from the world. "We should go," Ella said, her voice sharp with urgency. She took a cautious step back, her instincts screaming at her to retreat, to leave the mysterious tree and its magical creatures behind. But something held her in place, something that urged her to look, to understand. She didn't know what was coming, but the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, and every part of her body screamed that they were no longer just observers. They had crossed a line. Leo didn't move, though. His expression was tense, his eyes locked onto the trees where the orbs of light had vanished. "Something's happening," he whispered, almost to himself. "We're not the only ones out here." Ella's mind raced. The thought had crossed her mind too, that whatever was beneath the surface of this strange forest, it wasn't something she and Leo had stumbled upon by accident. No, they were part of something much bigger, much older, than either of them could have imagined. And now, they were being drawn into it. The rumble grew louder, and the ground trembled once more, this time more forcefully. Ella stumbled, feeling her footing shift beneath her, and she instinctively grabbed Leo's arm to steady herself. His grip on her tightened, his expression suddenly serious, a far cry from the carefree adventurer he had been just moments before. "What do you think it is?" Ella asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as though speaking too loudly might summon whatever force was shaking the earth beneath them. Leo didn't answer right away. He was too focused, scanning the forest with a look of growing apprehension. His eyes darted between the trees, as if expecting something, or someone, to emerge from the shadows. The light that had once been warm and ethereal now felt cold and distant, like the glow of the auroras themselves had shifted into something far less welcoming. The forest had gone still in a way that felt wrong, like the air was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Another rumble, this one closer, rattled the ground beneath them, and the trees began to bend with an unnatural force. The wind picked up, howling through the branches, its cold bite a sharp contrast to the warmth they'd felt just moments before. "I don't know," Leo finally said, his voice low, strained. "But I think it's time we find out." Before Ella could protest, he started moving toward the clearing where the glowing tree stood, its ice-covered branches still shimmering faintly in the growing darkness. Ella's stomach twisted as she followed him, her feet moving almost of their own accord. She didn't know what was happening, but it was clear that whatever had caused the creatures to scatter, whatever had made the ground tremble and the air grow thick with tension, was coming from that tree. And somehow, she knew, whatever was about to happen, they were about to face it together. "Leo, I think we should leave," Ella said, her voice tight with a sudden panic that she couldn't quite control. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and every instinct screamed at her to turn around, to get as far away from this place as possible. The forest had become something else, something unfamiliar, threatening. There was an oppressive weight in the air, a heavy sense of foreboding that she couldn't shake, no matter how much she tried to convince herself it was just her imagination running wild. But before Leo could respond, it was already too late. The first sign of what was coming was subtle, a shift in the air, a quiet, almost imperceptible change in the rhythm of the forest. The wind, which had been howling moments before, now stilled as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. And then the tree, a beacon of frozen beauty just moments before, began to move. The branches, which had been frozen solid, creaked and groaned like ancient wood under strain, swaying unnaturally as if pulled by an invisible force. The eerie, delicate glow that had surrounded the tree began to intensify, the shimmering light transforming into a sharp, almost blinding brilliance that cast long shadows across the snow. Ella stepped back instinctively, her eyes wide as the snow around them started to glow brighter, casting a cold, ethereal light that reflected off the ice-coated ground. The snow seemed to sparkle with an unnatural energy, as if the very air itself had become charged with something beyond their understanding. Every step she took felt heavier, as though the weight of the forest was bearing down on her, forcing her to stay in this strange, frozen world. She turned to look at Leo, her throat tight, but he was already looking past her, his eyes locked on the tree. His expression had changed, too. The carefree adventurer she'd known just a few moments ago was gone, replaced by a look of realization that cut through the tension in the air. And then, with a sudden, deafening crack, the ground beneath their feet trembled once more. Before they could react, the forest around them shifted again, this time with force. The path they had taken, the one that led them away from the group, was gone. Vanished. As though it had never been there to begin with. The snow-covered ground that had once stretched ahead of them was now replaced by a thick wall of frost-covered trees, their trunks twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like long fingers trying to trap them in their embrace. Ella's breath caught in her throat as she looked around. The once familiar forest had transformed into something unrecognizable. The trees were no longer the soft, snow-dusted pines they had walked through earlier. No, now they were tall, foreboding pillars of ice, their bark shimmering in the strange light that pulsed around them. The air was colder here, sharper, biting into her skin like tiny shards of glass. And yet, it wasn't just the physical coldness that made her shiver, it was the eerie sense that they were no longer welcome. The forest had closed in around them, and they were trapped. "Leo," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, trembling in the frigid air. "What's happening? We need to go now." But Leo didn't respond. He was staring at the wall of trees, his face pale as the reality of their situation began to settle in. The faint glow from the tree had turned into an almost blinding light, illuminating the entire clearing in an unnatural glow, casting long, shifting shadows across the snow. The once beautiful landscape now felt like a distorted dream, one that wasn't sure whether it was trying to draw them in or push them away. Without warning, the ground beneath them groaned again. The snow began to shift, as though the earth itself was alive, moving beneath their feet. Ella stumbled, her knees buckling from the unexpected tremor, and she reached out for Leo, her fingers brushing against his arm as she steadied herself. "We're trapped," she said, the words heavy in the cold air. Leo nodded, his face grim as he scanned their surroundings. "We need to find a way out. Now." But as he spoke, the frost-covered trees began to move, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. The trunks groaned as if alive, their branches creaking like bones in a graveyard. The snow beneath them began to pulse with an eerie energy, and the glowing orbs of light that had darted around the tree moments before reappeared, swirling in the air like tiny fireflies. But this time, they weren't just playful sparks of light. They moved with purpose, drawing closer, encircling the two of them, weaving through the trees, as though they were being watched by something far greater than the creatures they had encountered before. The forest had become a labyrinth of frost and shadows, and it felt as if the very world around them was shifting, folding in on itself, pulling them deeper into the unknown. The further they looked, the less they understood. The air had thickened, grown colder, until it felt like they were standing at the edge of a dream that was slowly turning into a nightmare. With each passing second, the pressure in the air grew heavier, the tension unbearable. And in the distance, the faint hum of something powerful, something ancient, began to resonate through the trees. The unmistakable feeling that they weren't alone, that they had stepped into a world not meant for them, settled over Ella like a cloak. In the distance, beyond the wall of trees, something stirred. "We're trapped," Ella whispered, her voice barely audible over the increasing hum of the air around them. The chill in the atmosphere seemed to seep deeper into her bones, and her breath came in shallow bursts, visible against the unnatural stillness of the frozen forest. Her heart raced in her chest, pounding harder with each passing second. The ground beneath them felt unstable, as though it was shifting beneath their feet, playing tricks on her senses. She glanced around frantically, her mind racing for any sign of escape, but all she saw were the towering ice-coated trees, their gnarled branches like frozen fingers reaching out from the shadows. The once pure, untouched beauty of the forest had turned into a maze of ancient, unwelcoming giants, closing in on them. The way back, the path they had taken just moments ago, was completely gone. The forest had swallowed it whole. There was no trace of the familiar trail, no sign of their footsteps. They had entered a space where time itself seemed to bend and shift, where reality felt warped. The pulsing light, the humming energy, everything around them felt wrong, like they had stumbled into a forgotten world that didn't belong to them. The feeling of being watched, of something lurking just out of sight, was almost overwhelming. It was as if the trees themselves were alive, aware of their every move, their every breath. She wanted to scream, to shout for help, but the thick silence around them held her in place. The trees stood like sentinels, their frozen forms unmoving yet somehow menacing. They were surrounded, trapped in a world that no longer made sense. Leo, still standing beside her, took a deep breath, his face pale but his voice unwavering, though Ella could hear the subtle cracks beneath the surface. "No, we're not," he said, though his words lacked the certainty they had once carried. His eyes flickered around the space, searching for any sign of hope. "We just need to find another way." Ella turned to him, her eyes searching his face for reassurance, but she saw none. The familiar spark of his easy confidence, the unshakable belief that they could handle whatever came their way, was gone. Instead, he seemed just as lost as she felt, trying to hold it together, to mask the panic creeping into his voice. The light around them flickered, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance on the edges of her vision. She swallowed hard, trying to calm the storm of thoughts swirling in her head. They couldn't stay here. The longer they did, the more it felt like the forest itself was closing in on them, tightening its grip with each passing second. "We need to move, Leo," she said, her voice stronger now, though it still trembled with fear. "We can't just stand here. Whatever's out there is getting closer." Leo glanced toward the shadows between the trees, his brow furrowing as he scanned the surroundings. "Yeah, I know," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. "But we can't go in blind. We need to figure out what this place is, why it's doing this. There has to be a way out, we just have to find it." Ella shook her head, her heart heavy with doubt. "I don't think we have time to figure it out, Leo. Something's not right. The air. It feels different. And those lights, those creatures, they were leading us here, but they're not like anything we've seen before. We've got to get back before. She cut herself off, her throat tightening as she heard a faint sound coming from deeper within the forest. It was low, almost imperceptible at first, but it grew louder, a low rumble, like the earth itself was groaning, protesting the intrusion of their presence. Leo stiffened beside her, his eyes widening as the sound grew, reverberating through the trees. It was a strange, unsettling noise, like something ancient and powerful was stirring in the distance, something that had been waiting for them, waiting for this moment. "What is that?" Ella whispered, her voice small against the overwhelming weight of the forest. Leo didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a step forward, his body tense as he peered into the darkness between the ice-covered trunks. His lips pressed together in a hard line as the rumbling continued, now accompanied by a series of strange crackling noises, like the forest itself was coming alive. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice strained. "But we need to move. And fast." Ella looked around again, her mind racing as she tried to think of a way out. The walls of trees had closed in on them, and the once clear path was now an impenetrable maze of frozen trunks and thick, sparkling snow. The hum in the air had grown louder, vibrating through her bones, making it difficult to think straight. It was as if the very forest had become an extension of something far older, far more powerful, than either of them could comprehend. Leo was already taking a few steps, his gaze fixed ahead, his movements quicker now, more determined. But Ella hesitated. The strange energy in the air, the eerie stillness that had descended upon the forest, it was pulling her in the opposite direction. Something about it was calling to her, tempting her to explore further, to uncover what lay hidden beneath the surface of this frozen world. She could feel it, a strange magnetic pull that beckoned her deeper into the unknown. But that same pull also filled her with dread. She had to make a decision. She could follow Leo, trust in his ability to find a way out, or she could listen to the voice in her head telling her that they needed to get back to the group, that they weren't supposed to be here. But even as the thought crossed her mind, she knew the answer. They couldn't stay. And they couldn't afford to wait any longer. With a deep breath, Ella started after Leo, her heart pounding in her chest as she pushed through the thick snow, determined to find a way out of the tangled web of ice and shadow that had ensnared them. They wandered through the forest, the thick blanket of snow crunching softly underfoot with every step they took. The cold, sharp air bit at their skin, but the vibrant auroras above, swirling in shades of green, purple, and blue, seemed to offer a strange sense of warmth, a paradox in the heart of the frigid wilderness. The ethereal light danced across the snow, casting long, intricate shadows on the ground that seemed to shift and change, as though the very earth was alive, breathing with the rhythm of the sky above. The colors of the aurora pulsed in time with the quiet hum in the air, drawing Ella's eyes up again and again, mesmerized by the sight. The world around them felt surreal, like something out of a dream. Every snowflake that fell from the sky sparkled like a tiny diamond, glistening in the glowing light, and the trees around them seemed to have transformed into towering, frosted statues, their branches like delicate lacework against the glowing sky. There was no wind, no sound, just the quiet, the stillness, and the overwhelming beauty of a place that felt both ancient and timeless. The atmosphere was thick with magic, so thick, in fact, that Ella found herself wondering if she had stepped beyond reality itself. Had they crossed some invisible boundary? Was this a dream they couldn't wake up from? She glanced over at Leo, who was walking ahead, his steps slow and deliberate, his eyes scanning the strange forest as if trying to make sense of it all. His usually carefree demeanor had shifted, he seemed unnerved, uncertain. Ella couldn't blame him. Everything about this place felt wrong. It wasn't just the eerie beauty or the unsettling silence. It was something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface, something that tugged at her instinctively, warning her that they were far beyond the safety of anything they had known before. "I don't think we're in the same place anymore," she said, her voice low, as though speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile illusion around them. Leo didn't respond at first. His face was set, focused, as if he were lost in his own thoughts. But then, without looking at her, he asked, "What do you mean?" Ella stopped in her tracks, her breath coming in short bursts as she tried to steady her racing heart. She took a step closer to him, her eyes narrowing as she searched the endless expanse of the forest. Everything looked the same, yet somehow different. The trees stood so still, their icy forms casting long, sharp shadows across the ground. The path they had been following, the one they thought would lead them back to the others, was gone, swallowed up by the ever-changing, ever-shifting snow. The landscape around them was shifting too, and she couldn't tell if it was real or just an illusion. "I don't know," she said slowly, her voice thick with doubt. "It's just, everything feels wrong. Like we've crossed into something else, something that doesn't make sense. The air is heavier, like it's full of something we can't see, and I can't shake this feeling that the forest is moving around us." Leo looked up at her then, finally meeting her gaze. His expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of concern in his eyes. "You're overthinking it, Elle. It's just the auroras messing with your mind. The light plays tricks on you in places like this. We're still in the same forest. It's just a little strange. That's all." Ella didn't answer at first. She couldn't bring herself to dismiss the feeling that had settled in her chest like a heavy weight. She had been in the woods before, many times in fact, but never like this. Never in a place so alive. The trees seemed to hum, as if they were waiting for something, watching them as they moved. The snow that fell from the sky didn't fall the way it should. It didn't land with the usual soft crunch. It seemed to melt upon impact, disappearing as if it were being absorbed by the very ground beneath them. The air smelled different too, tinged with something sweet and metallic. Leo took a deep breath, his boots crunching in the snow as he stepped forward, breaking the silence between them. "It's just a forest, Ella. Don't let it get to you. We'll find our way back to the group." "I know it." Ella wasn't so sure. The longer they walked, the more it felt like they were being drawn deeper into something they didn't understand. She could feel it, a pull in the air, like a magnetic force that urged them onward, urging them to keep walking, to keep moving toward the unknown. It was tempting, almost hypnotic. Her mind felt foggy, her thoughts scattered, but there was a sharpness to the silence that kept her alert, made her aware that they weren't alone. Something was watching them. She shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. "I just don't know how much longer I can keep going like this, Leo. This place isn't right." He stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression softer now. He stepped toward her, placing a hand on her shoulder, offering her the reassurance he always did when things got tough. "I know you're scared, Elle. But we'll get out of here. We always do." Ella nodded, though her heart still pounded with unease. Leo might be confident, but she couldn't shake the sense of impending danger. Something in this forest, something ancient, was stirring. And no matter how much she wanted to deny it, she couldn't escape the feeling that the world around them was slipping away, like they were falling further and further into something they might never be able to climb out of. The trees around them shifted in the corner of her eye, their forms dark and looming. The auroras above grew brighter, the colors swirling faster now, almost violently, as though they were reflecting the growing tension in the air. Ella turned away from Leo, her gaze fixed on the path ahead, hoping that somehow the world would make sense again if they just kept walking, if they just pushed forward. But deep inside, she knew the truth. They weren't in the same place anymore. "Look at the trees. They're not normal," Ella whispered, her voice trembling slightly with a mix of awe and unease. Leo turned, following her gaze. His heart skipped a beat as he took in the scene around them. The trees, once towering, frozen sentinels, now seemed almost alive. Their trunks weren't rigid and immovable like any trees he'd ever seen. Instead, they flexed and shifted as if they had a life of their own. Their bark, slick and iridescent, shimmered in the glow of the auroras. Above, casting an eerie, otherworldly light on the forest floor. The branches twisted and stretched, not in the way a tree might bend in the wind, but in a deliberate fluid motion, as if they were reaching for something, waiting. But what sent a cold shiver down Leo's spine was the way the snow behaved. The snowflakes that had once drifted lazily from the sky now seemed to defy gravity, floating upward in delicate spirals. They caught the faint, shimmering light of the trees, creating a haunting dance of glimmering lights, as if the very air around them had turned into something otherworldly. It was as though the snow, the trees, and the sky were all part of a grand performance, a dance that didn't belong to this world. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, his breath coming in short, shallow bursts as he stared at the twisted, living trees. The movement was slow, but deliberate. A slight quiver in the branches, a subtle flicker in the bark, as if they were watching him, waiting for something. "This is insane," Leo muttered under his breath, the words laced with disbelief, but there was something else in his tone. There was wonder there, too, mixed with the tension that thrummed in the air. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the eerie, living forest around them. He felt as though he was standing at the edge of a dream that was far too vivid and far too real to be dismissed. Every step they had taken in this forest had felt like a step away from reality, and now this was the moment when the line between the two worlds felt like it had completely dissolved. The trees weren't just trees. They weren't just the natural, frozen sentinels of the forest anymore. They were something else, something ancient, something unknowable. The ground beneath his boots felt softer now, the snow cushioning his steps more gently than it should have. It wasn't just the snow though, it was everything. The entire landscape seemed to be shifting, changing in subtle ways that defied logic. He could almost hear it, the whispering of the trees, the creaking of their limbs as they shifted, stretching toward the sky or perhaps reaching for them, pulling them deeper into the unknown. "Leo, do you feel that?" Ella's voice broke through his thoughts. She was standing a few steps behind him, her eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. He turned to look at her, but even as he opened his mouth to speak, he noticed that something about her had changed. She was different. Her expression was tight, her brow furrowed in deep thought, but there was an odd look in her eyes, one that he couldn't quite place, one that sent a ripple of unease through his chest. "Yeah," Leo replied slowly, stepping forward cautiously. "I feel it too." It was subtle at first, just a flicker, a change in the air that made the world feel colder, heavier. But as he took another step, the sensation grew stronger, as if the forest itself was responding to them, reacting to their presence. The air became denser, heavier, almost thick with anticipation, and the snow danced in the air like it was alive, like it had a purpose beyond simply falling to the ground. The trees' movements seemed synchronized, almost as if they were breathing, sighing with the weight of 1,000 years. Their branches, once stiff and frozen, now swayed gently, their edges sharp and jagged, their bark gleaming with an unnatural sheen. There was a pulse in the air, a steady beat that seemed to emanate from the very earth beneath their feet. Leo couldn't shake the feeling that it was all watching them. Not just the trees, but the entire forest. Every gust of wind, every flicker of light in the distance, every shadow that seemed to stretch longer than it should, was watching them, waiting for them to make the wrong move. "Leo," Ella said again, her voice a little more frantic now. "This isn't right. Something's wrong." Leo opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. His thoughts swirled in his head, too fast to capture, too jumbled to make sense of. The forest wasn't just strange, it was alive. Alive in a way that no place should be. Alive in a way that was unnatural, unsettling. The snow continued to float upwards, swirling in slow circles as if caught in an invisible wind, their delicate shapes shimmering in the eerie light of the trees. A chill ran down Leo's spine, but there was still a part of him, deep down, perhaps where his survival instinct should have been, that was captivated by the sight. There was a beauty in it, yes. An undeniable, magnetic beauty. The way the trees seemed to breathe, the way the snow moved in impossible patterns, the way everything in this forest felt like it had been untouched by time. It was as if they had stumbled into a forgotten realm, one that had been hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to notice. He swallowed hard, forcing his pulse to steady, but the knot of unease in his stomach only tightened. "This is insane," he said again, more to himself than to Ella, though the words still carried that strange sense of wonder. The world around them had become something so far beyond their understanding, so beyond the realm of what he had once known, that he couldn't help but feel the deep, unshakable truth. This was no longer just a hike through the forest. They had crossed a threshold into something far darker, far more mysterious than they had ever imagined. And yet, he couldn't look away. They came to a frozen lake, its surface perfectly smooth, reflecting the auroras above like a flawless mirror. The colors of the sky seemed to stretch across the lake's surface, painting the ice with streaks of vibrant green, purple, and blue, as though the entire world had turned into a living painting. The soft hum of the auroras, barely perceptible in the stillness of the forest, added a haunting layer to the surreal beauty of the scene. Ella stopped in her tracks, her boots crunching softly in the snow, eyes fixed on the glassy surface of the lake. There was something unnerving about it, the way the ice gleamed in the strange shifting light, as if it were hiding something beneath its perfect, pristine surface. It almost felt as if the lake were holding its breath, waiting for them to come closer. The air around them was still, so still it seemed to have taken on a weight, as though the entire forest had paused in silent anticipation. As Ella stepped closer to the edge, her gaze dropped to the ice, and her breath caught in her throat. Beneath the surface, distorted shapes pressed against the underside of the ice. At first, they seemed to be nothing more than vague shadows. Shapes that might have been the remnants of an old dream or the trick of a mind straining under the weight of exhaustion. But as Ella leaned in closer, squinting through the smooth surface, she saw them more clearly. The shapes were too distinct, too solid to be anything but real. There were creatures, huge, twisted forms that seemed almost otherworldly. Their limbs were long and angular, more like branches of the ancient trees than the legs of any animal Ella had ever seen. Some of the creatures had heads that seemed impossibly large, with eyes that were too wide, too deep. The icy glow from above cast faint reflections in their hollow sockets, making them appear even more unnatural. There were bodies draped in patterns of scales and fur, but the fur wasn't like any she'd encountered. It looked frozen, stiff, almost crystalline. Some of the shapes were humanoid, but with twisted proportions that seemed to bend the rules of nature itself. Ella's throat tightened, the weight of what she was seeing pressing down on her chest. She took a step back, feeling a chill that wasn't from the cold air but from something deeper, something primal. It felt wrong, too wrong. Like the creatures beneath the ice didn't belong in the world they knew. Like they were from another realm altogether, a place where the laws of nature didn't apply. "What are they?" she asked, her voice a soft whisper, as if speaking too loudly might break some unspoken rule of the place they had stumbled upon. Leo, who had been staring at the same frozen scene, took a step back, his eyes narrowing as he tried to make sense of what they were looking at. He rubbed his forehead with his gloved hand, shaking his head slightly, as though trying to shake off the strange disorientation creeping into his mind. "I don't know," Leo said, his voice low and unsteady, his usual bravado gone. "But I don't want to find out." His words hung in the air between them, heavy and filled with the same unease that swirled in the pit of Ella's stomach. His face had drained of its usual cocky confidence, his expression now tight with concern. He glanced nervously around the frozen lake, as though the figures beneath the ice weren't the only thing he had to fear. Ella's gaze lingered on the lake, her heartbeat quickening as she tried to look away but found herself drawn back to the strange shapes beneath the surface. The creatures seemed to shift, their limbs moving ever so slightly, just enough to make it feel like they were alive, like they were watching her. The ice, cold and unyielding, seemed to vibrate under her feet, sending a shiver through her body. She stepped back again, her boots crunching on the snow as she tried to pull herself away from the sight. But the feeling of being watched didn't leave. It was as if the lake itself was an entity, an ancient presence that had been there long before they had arrived, long before the world had begun to change. "Leo, what if they're trapped?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Leo hesitated, looking at the lake once more. His expression was grim, but his mind seemed to be racing, trying to find any logical explanation that might bring him some peace. "I don't know, Ella. But I think some things are better left alone. We don't know what they are, or how long they've been down there." The silence between them stretched, filled only by the distant sound of the wind whispering through the forest. The auroras above continued their dance, their colors flickering across the ice, but now, the beauty seemed almost taunting. The night was still, but beneath the surface of the lake, everything felt alive in a way that made Ella's skin crawl. "I don't think this place is like the world we know," Ella said, barely able to find the words to describe the unease that had crept into her bones. "It feels like we're trespassing, like we've crossed into something we shouldn't have." Leo was silent for a moment, his brow furrowed as he took in the frozen landscape. "I think you're right," he said finally, his voice barely above a murmur. "We need to leave." But as they turned to leave, the air seemed to grow thicker, heavier, as if something had changed in the forest around them. The hairs on the back of Ella's neck prickled again, and for a brief moment, she wondered if they had already passed the point of no return. The ice beneath their feet felt even colder now, more solid, as though the lake had begun to tighten its grip on them, unwilling to let them go without a price. The figures beneath the ice were still there, still staring, and somehow, their gaze felt even more intense now, more insistent, as if something inside the lake was reaching for them. And just before they turned their backs to the lake, Ella could have sworn she saw one of the figures move. As they turned to leave the lake, a soft melody filled the air, barely noticeable at first, like a whisper carried on the wind. It was so faint that Ella wasn't sure if it was the wind itself or something else. But with each step they took away from the lake, the melody grew clearer, more distinct. It was a haunting, ethereal sound, like the combined hum of strings and wind chimes, delicate yet strangely magnetic. It wasn't the kind of music Ella was used to hearing. It didn't belong to any instrument she knew, nor did it sound human. It was something else, something timeless. Ella stopped mid-step, her boots crunching in the snow as she tilted her head, trying to locate the source of the sound. The melody seemed to dance in the air, swirling around them, echoing off the trees and filling the empty spaces of the forest. There was something mesmerizing about it, almost like the forest itself had started singing, using the wind as its voice, and each note seemed to resonate with the magic that hung in the air. "Do you hear that?" Ella asked, her voice low, as if speaking too loudly might break the enchantment that had woven itself around them. Her breath came out in visible clouds, but the air itself felt oddly warm despite the cold around them, like the melody was wrapping them in a blanket of comfort and mystery. Leo stopped beside her, frowning as he focused on the sound. His brow furrowed in confusion, the usual playfulness gone from his expression. "Yeah," he replied, his voice barely a whisper. "It's coming from over there." He pointed ahead, toward the edge of the forest where the trees grew denser. The melody was louder now, as though it were calling them forward, pulling them towards something unknown. It was both inviting and foreboding at the same time, like the siren song of a creature lurking just beyond the visible. Leo hesitated, his hand still hovering in the direction of the sound. "What do you think it is?" Ella asked, her curiosity battling with a deep sense of caution that was starting to tug at her insides. She could feel the hairs on the back of her neck prickling again, not from fear, but from something deeper, something primal telling her that this was no ordinary melody. This wasn't a song meant to comfort. It felt like a warning, cloaked in the softness of the notes, beckoning them into the unknown. Leo's eyes narrowed, his gaze scanning the forest ahead as if trying to pierce through the shadows of the trees. "I don't know," he said, his voice low, his earlier bravado nowhere to be found. The air between them seemed charged, electric. "But it feels like it's coming from something. Something that doesn't want us to leave. Like it's trying to lead us somewhere." Ella shifted uneasily, her heart beginning to race. She wanted to turn around, to run back to the lake and retrace their steps, but something in the melody kept her frozen, her feet rooted to the ground. It was like the song was a thread that was tying them to the forest, pulling them in, urging them to follow. The more she listened, the clearer the melody became. It was no longer just a haunting hum but a complex, layered sound. There were distinct chords now, almost like the vibrations of an ancient instrument being plucked in time with her heartbeat. The melody swirled around them, filling the silence of the forest, and yet, there was an odd, eerie stillness to everything around them. The wind had died down, the snow had quieted, and even the distant sounds of wildlife had vanished. It was as if the entire forest had fallen into a trance. "Ella," Leo's voice was a whisper now, but it trembled with a mix of awe and fear. "Do you see that?" Ella turned her head, following the direction of Leo's gaze, and for the first time, she noticed something else, something subtle but unmistakable. Through the thick trees ahead, just beyond the edge of their view, a faint glow seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the melody. It wasn't a light from the auroras above, but a steady, gentle radiance coming from deeper within the forest. The glow was soft, almost like moonlight, but it was warmer. Its light felt alive, as if it were breathing along with the music. "Where is that coming from?" Ella asked, her voice barely audible as she took a step forward, unable to resist the pull of the song. The forest around them was holding its breath, watching, waiting. The strange light flickered again, more pronounced this time, and the melody seemed to swell in response, as if inviting them closer. "I don't know," Leo murmured, his eyes wide, his curiosity battling with his growing unease. "But we should be careful. Whatever this is, it doesn't feel right." Ella couldn't tear her gaze away from the glow. The melody was calling her, coaxing her, its delicate notes weaving into the very fabric of the air, making her feel lighter, as though her body were becoming weightless. She could feel herself moving toward it, her feet no longer of her own will. It was as if the forest had cast a spell on her, and with every step she took, the music wrapped itself tighter around her like an invisible chain. The faint light seemed to grow brighter with each passing moment, and soon, the trees parted just enough for them to see the source, a shape looming and still, bathed in the golden glow of the melody. It was too far to make out clearly, but the silhouette was unmistakable, a massive figure, shrouded in mystery and the pulse of the song. It seemed to shimmer in the air, like a mirage, but real enough to make the ground beneath their feet tremble with each beat of the melody. Ella stopped just short of stepping into the light, her breath catching in her throat. "Leo, we have to go back." But Leo, entranced by the music, was already moving forward, one slow, deliberate step after another. The forest around them felt alive, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The song had become louder now, louder than the sound of their footsteps, louder than their hearts, and in its notes, Ella could almost feel something watching them from the shadows. Something ancient and wise, waiting for them to make their move. And yet, no matter how much she told herself to turn around and flee, she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was ahead had been waiting for them all along. They followed the sound to a small clearing where the air felt different, almost charged with energy. The trees parted just enough to reveal a space where the snow seemed to glisten with a silvery sheen, as if the very earth was infused with starlight. And there, sitting on a large rock in the center of the clearing, was a figure unlike anything Ella and Leo had ever seen. She was playing a harp made entirely of ice, its delicate strings shimmering in the ethereal glow of the surrounding forest. Each note that she plucked seemed to vibrate in the air, sending ripples across the snowy ground. The sound was hauntingly beautiful, like a melody that had been lost to time but now found its way back to the world. It was pure and unearthly, filling the space around them with an almost tangible magic. The woman herself was a vision. Her hair flowed like silver ribbons, strands catching the faint light and gleaming with an iridescent quality, as if woven from the threads of moonlight. It cascaded around her shoulders, moving with a life of its own, almost as if it were a part of the wind itself. Her skin was pale, but not in the way of someone who had been untouched by sunlight. It was as if she were made from the very snow and ice of the forest, her presence blending with the frozen landscape. Her eyes, however, were the most striking of all. They glowed softly with a light that seemed to shift in color, from the faintest lavender to a deep, rich blue. They looked like the depths of the night sky, filled with ancient knowledge and secrets that no one had ever been meant to understand. Ella and Leo stood frozen at the edge of the clearing, unsure of what to do. The woman's presence felt both inviting and intimidating, as though she were a part of the forest itself, a being who existed beyond the realm of normal understanding. She seemed to radiate a calm, timeless wisdom, yet there was an underlying sense of power that made the air around them seem thicker, charged with energy. The woman's fingers continued to dance across the icy strings of her harp, the music swirling around them, luring them closer with its hypnotic pull. The air was filled with an unspoken invitation, as though she was calling them to come closer, to listen, to understand. Ella's heart raced, her curiosity overwhelming her caution. She had never felt so drawn to anything before. Everything in her told her to approach, to hear what she had to say, to learn what secrets lay hidden beneath her gaze. But as they stepped into the clearing, the woman finally stopped playing. Her fingers hovered above the strings for a moment, and the silence that followed was almost as deep as the forest itself. Slowly, she turned her head toward them, her glowing eyes meeting theirs. The calmness in her gaze sent a shiver through Ella's spine, but it wasn't one of fear. It was something else, something that felt like the forest itself had reached out and touched her soul. "Welcome," she said, her voice like the wind through the trees, soft and melodic, but carrying a weight of unspoken knowledge. Her words seemed to wrap around them, filling the space between breaths. "You're far from home." Ella and Leo exchanged a glance, both of them hesitant but unable to turn away. It wasn't just the beauty of the woman that captivated them, it was the way the forest itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next moment, like time had stopped just to allow this encounter to unfold. The air grew still as the woman's words hung in the space between them, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade away. The distant glow of the auroras, the coldness of the snow beneath their feet, even the strange melody of the harp seemed to blur into the background, leaving only her presence, as if she was the very heart of this magical place. Ella's voice faltered as she tried to speak. "We didn't mean to intrude. We were just following the sound. The woman smiled, but it wasn't a smile of warmth. It was one of knowing, like she had seen this moment before, countless times, and knew exactly how it would unfold. Her lips parted, but it wasn't to respond. Instead, she stood up, the movement so graceful it seemed to defy the laws of nature, and walked toward them with a fluidity that made her seem more like a spirit than a physical being. The snow beneath her feet didn't crunch, it melted away, as if the earth itself was giving way beneath her steps, parting to allow her to pass. She moved with the ease of someone who didn't belong to time, her presence so ethereal that it was hard to tell if she was walking or floating. As she approached them, the temperature seemed to drop, but the air around them grew heavier with the music, filling their senses to the point where they could feel it in their bones. Ella could hardly breathe as the woman drew closer. "You've come far," she said again, her voice a whisper, as if the words were meant only for them. "But not for the reasons you think." Leo opened his mouth to speak, but the woman raised her hand, her palm facing them, and in that instant, they both felt a deep, quiet stillness wash over them. It wasn't a command, it was more like a force of nature, as if the very world around them had come to a halt. "The path you've walked," she continued, her gaze never leaving theirs, "has led you here for a purpose. A purpose that you must choose, but know this, not all who enter these woods are meant to leave. And even fewer understand the truths they are given." The words hung in the air like a challenge, but also like an invitation, and for a moment, Ella couldn't move. She felt as though she had been suspended in time, caught between two worlds, one that was familiar, and one that she couldn't quite comprehend, but which was now beckoning her forward. The snow beneath her feet no longer seemed cold. It seemed alive, thrumming with the energy of the woman's harp, a song that was far older than anything she had ever known. Leo stepped forward, his voice trembling with a mixture of awe and confusion. "What truths? What is this place?" The woman's smile deepened, but she didn't answer. Instead, she stepped back, the harp now glowing more brightly than before, and with a single motion, she began to play once again. The notes that followed were different now, deeper, richer, more complex. It was as if she were playing a song that was not just for them, but for the world itself. "You will find the answers," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the rising melody. "But be careful, for some questions are better left unasked." The music swirled around them once more, and the clearing seemed to pulse with an ancient energy, as if the forest itself had begun to wake. Ella stepped forward cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath coming in shallow bursts. The air around her felt thick, charged with energy, like the forest itself was watching, waiting. "We didn't mean to intrude. We got lost," she said, her voice steady, but the uncertainty in her eyes betrayed her. The woman's smile deepened, soft and knowing. It wasn't the kind of smile someone gives when they want to comfort you. It was the smile of someone who had seen it all before, someone who understood more than anyone else could. "No one comes here by accident," she said, her voice like the whisper of the wind, both gentle and haunting. "The mountain brought you." Ella frowned, feeling a chill run down her spine. The mountain brought them? They had simply been following a strange path, led by the glowing lights of the creatures and the pull of the auroras. Nothing about this felt accidental, but the woman's words seemed to pierce the air around them, heavy with meaning. Leo, always the skeptic, crossed his arms, but even he couldn't mask the intrigue in his voice. "What do you mean?" he asked, his tone skeptical but with an underlying note of curiosity that couldn't be hidden. His eyes darted around, taking in the clearing, the glowing woman, and the trees that seemed to pulse with life. Something about this place felt ancient, alive, and he didn't know whether that was comforting or terrifying. The woman took a step forward, her presence growing even more commanding, yet still exuding an aura of calm. She moved as if she were part of the forest itself, like a leaf in the breeze, like the ice in the river, at once delicate and formidable. Her eyes, glowing softly in the dim light, held Leo's gaze, and for a moment, it felt like she could see right through him, like she knew his every thought. "The Aurora Mountains are alive," she said, her voice growing more deliberate, her words carrying a weight that seemed to resonate in the ground beneath their feet. "They choose who to reveal their secrets to. You've been chosen." Ella's heart skipped a beat at her words. Chosen? For what? They hadn't asked for this, hadn't planned to be in this magical, confusing place, surrounded by things they couldn't understand. This wasn't a place they could have stumbled upon by accident. The mountain had drawn them here, but for what purpose? The woman's gaze softened for a brief moment, as if sensing the confusion in their minds, but then she continued, her voice now a mere whisper, as though the trees themselves were listening. The Aurora Mountains hold more than just beauty. They are older than the world itself. They hold secrets, knowledge, power, but only those who are worthy are allowed to see them, to understand them. And you too have been called here for a reason. She paused, the silence hanging in the air, thick with anticipation. Ella felt a tightening in her chest. Called here for a reason, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. It sounded almost too unreal to believe. But we're just two wanderers lost in the snow. The woman finished for her, her smile turning gentle but still knowing. Perhaps. But that is only part of your journey. You are here now, and the mountain has spoken. She motioned to the towering peaks in the distance, their jagged tips just visible beyond the tree line, bathed in the light of the aurora. The land calls to those who are ready to listen. It is not by chance that you stand before me now. The path you walk is ancient. The mountain has been waiting for you. Ella's mind raced. How could this be? She had always loved stories about magic and adventure, but never in her wildest dreams did she imagine finding herself at the center of one. The idea that the mountain itself had chosen them, that there was something deeper to their journey. It felt like stepping into a world far beyond her understanding. Leo took a half step back, his skepticism still thick in the air. But there was no denying the pull, the energy of the place. He had always been the logical one, the one who needed proof. But there was something undeniable about this place, something that defied reason. What does it want from us? He asked, his voice low and steady, though his eyes flickered with the same wonder and fear that Ella felt. The woman's expression darkened, and her eyes flickered momentarily with something that might have been sorrow, or perhaps something older, something far more ancient. The mountain does not desire anything from you, she said slowly. It simply reveals itself to those it chooses. But the knowledge you seek will not come easily. It requires great understanding, great sacrifice. Only those who are worthy can carry its truth. Ella felt the weight of her words settle in the pit of her stomach. Sacrifice? She glanced at Leo, whose jaw was clenched, as if weighing the same questions in his mind. What were they walking into? What had they been chosen for? And what would they have to give up to understand the truth the mountain held? The mountain will reveal its secrets in time, the woman continued, her tone no longer gentle but firm, as if she had seen this moment unfold countless times before. But remember, knowledge is not always a gift. It can be a burden, one that will test you both in ways you cannot yet imagine. The air around them felt even heavier now, like the earth itself was holding its breath. Ella could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, the enormity of what they were about to embark on. She swallowed, trying to steady her nerves, but she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change, that nothing would ever be the same again. The mountain had chosen them, yes. But at what cost? And what would they find on the other side of this journey? The woman's gaze softened, and she stepped back, lowering her harp once more. The path will reveal itself when the time is right, she said, her voice filled with an almost maternal warmth. Until then, trust in the journey. Trust in the mountain. And above all, trust each other. With that, the clearing seemed to shift, as if the very air had changed. The trees whispered in the distance, and the aurora above flickered with a new intensity, as though the forest itself had accepted their presence, had recognized their place in the unfolding story. Ella and Leo stood in stunned silence, the weight of the woman's words pressing on them like the snow beneath their feet. The mountain had chosen them. But for what? And what would it ask of them? They didn't know. But one thing was certain, their journey had only just begun. The woman's gaze was steady as she spoke, her words slow and deliberate, as if each syllable carried a weight that would shape their futures. Ella and Leo listened intently, the stillness of the clearing settling around them like a thick fog. You cannot simply leave, the woman continued, her voice soft but firm. The mountain has chosen you, but it requires something in return. To find your way back, to leave this place, you must complete a task. A task that will test you in ways you cannot yet imagine. Ella's heart raced. She hadn't expected this. A task? A test? They hadn't even understood why they were here, much less what was required of them. She glanced at Leo, whose face was unreadable, a mixture of disbelief and apprehension clouding his expression. The woman reached into the folds of her flowing robe, and with a fluid motion, she pulled out a small vial. It shimmered in her hands, the liquid inside swirling with colors that seemed to dance like the auroras above. The glow from the vial bathed her face in soft, otherworldly light, giving her an almost ethereal presence. It was as if the very essence of the aurora had been captured in this tiny vessel, a sliver of the mountain's magic contained in something so fragile. She extended the vial toward them, her eyes never leaving theirs. "Take this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This liquid is the key to your journey. It will guide you, but it will also challenge you. You must pour it at the heart of the mountain, where the ancient forces lie dormant. There, the truth will be revealed." Ella hesitated for a moment, her fingers brushing the cool glass of the vial. It felt heavy, though it was light in weight. There was something ancient and powerful about it, a sense of urgency pressing in as she held it. She could feel the energy of the liquid pulsing beneath the glass, almost as if it were alive, aware of the task ahead. "If you succeed," the woman added, her tone shifting, becoming more resolute, "you'll be free. The mountain will release you, and you will return to where you belong. But be warned, this task is not simple. It will test everything you know, everything you believe in. It is a trial, a journey of both mind and spirit. You may not come back the same." Leo frowned, his hand hovering near the vial, but he didn't take it yet. "What do you mean by the heart of the mountain? Where is that?" The woman's gaze darkened for a fleeting moment, and the wind seemed to still in the clearing. "The heart of the mountain lies deep within its core," she said, her voice lower now, filled with a gravity that made the air feel heavier. "It is a place where time and reality blur, where the past, present, and future are one. Only those with the strength to face the truth of what lies inside can reach it. Many have tried, and many have failed." Ella felt a shiver run down her spine. The heart of the mountain sounded like a place born of legend, a place that no one could truly understand until they were standing before it, faced with the choice of what to believe, and what to sacrifice. "Why us?" Leo asked, his voice strained, as if trying to make sense of everything. "Why are we the ones chosen for this task?" The woman smiled, but it wasn't a reassuring smile. It was a smile that carried the weight of centuries of wisdom, of knowledge that she could not fully share. "The mountain chooses only those who have the potential to unlock its secrets. It senses something within you both." "Perhaps." Ella nodded, trying to force a calm she didn't feel. She placed one foot carefully onto the ice, testing it before moving forward. The bridge groaned under their weight, the ice creaking as if it was warning them to turn back. She glanced over at Leo again, who had already taken the first few steps, his eyes fixed straight ahead, his body rigid with tension. "Just take it slow," she said, trying to steady herself as much as him. "We can't rush this." The wind howled around them, pulling at their clothes, making the ice beneath their feet shimmer and crack as though it might give way at any moment. Ella's stomach turned with each step, the sound of the ice groaning underfoot like a warning cry. Every time she looked down, she saw nothing but the void below them, the dark ravine stretching farther than she could comprehend. Ahead, the shadowy figures in the mist seemed to shift and flicker like phantoms, moving in and out of view, but never fully coming into focus. The strange creatures that watched them from the shadows had eyes that glowed, reflecting the pale light from the auroras, but whenever they tried to focus on one, it would vanish into the mist. "Don't look at them," Leo said quietly, his voice barely carrying over the wind. "Keep your focus on the bridge. They're just illusions." Ella nodded, though a part of her wanted to look, to know what they were, what was out there waiting for them. But another part of her knew that it didn't matter. She had to trust Leo, trust the path they were on, no matter how uncertain it seemed. The air was thick with tension as they moved farther along the bridge. Every step felt like it could be their last. The cold seeped into her bones, her fingers numb from gripping Leo's hand so tightly. She tried to push the fear from her mind, but it crept in, whispering that the ice might shatter, that the ravine was too deep, that they weren't going to make it. Suddenly, a gust of wind slammed into them, and the bridge swayed underfoot, groaning as though it might break. Ella gasped, her heart leaping into her throat as the ice cracked beneath them. She clutched Leo's hand tighter, her other arm stretched out to balance herself against the gust. The cold wind sliced through the air, sending a flurry of snow into their faces. "Leo!" Ella shouted, her voice barely audible over the wind. "We have to move faster." Leo's eyes were wide with fear, but he didn't hesitate. He tugged on her hand, pulling her forward as they quickened their pace. The ice bridge seemed to stretch endlessly, but finally, they reached the other side breathless and shaken. Ella collapsed to her knees, her hands shaking from the adrenaline. Leo stood over her, looking equally drained, his chest heaving as he fought to steady his breath. "We made it," he said, though his voice held no triumph, only a shared relief that they had survived. The fear still lingered in his eyes, the same fear that had held Ella in its grip the entire crossing. Ella nodded, forcing herself to stand. "We have to keep going," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "The heart of the mountain is still ahead." Leo glanced back at the bridge, then at the misty figures lingering in the shadows. "I'm not sure what we'll find next," he murmured, "but we can't turn back now." Together, they turned away from the ravine and continued down the narrow path ahead, the echoes of the wind and the distant calls of unseen creatures following them into the unknown. The task was far from over, and the mountain had yet to reveal its final challenge. But for now, they could only keep moving forward. When they finally reached the heart of the mountain, the air seemed to change. The stillness around them was thick with anticipation, as though the very mountain was holding its breath, waiting. The ground beneath their feet hummed with an energy they could feel deep in their bones. They had traveled for what felt like an eternity, through treacherous paths, across narrow ice bridges, and through vast stretches of misty woods, and now they were standing at the threshold of something that defied explanation. Before them, the cavern opened up like the mouth of a sleeping giant, its walls lined with massive crystals that shimmered in the light of the aurora above. The entire cavern was bathed in an ethereal glow, as if the very rocks themselves were alive, pulsing with a hidden energy. The light from the auroras, now brighter and more vivid than ever, filtered through the crystals, scattering across the cavern like beams of liquid color. The colors of the aurora, green, purple, blue, and hints of pink, seemed to dance in the air, swirling around them as though the light itself was sentient. Ella stood frozen at the entrance, her breath caught in her throat. The sight before her was both beautiful and overwhelming. The cavern stretched endlessly ahead, its crystalline walls rising into the darkness above, disappearing into shadows that seemed to ripple and shift. She could hear the faint hum of the crystals vibrating, a low resonant sound that felt like it was coming from deep within the earth itself, as if the heart of the mountain was alive, echoing with the secrets it had kept hidden for centuries. Beside her, Leo was equally in awe, his eyes wide as he took in the cavern's splendor. He reached out a hand toward one of the larger crystals, his fingers brushing against the cold, smooth surface. The crystal reacted to his touch, glowing brighter for a moment before settling back into its gentle shimmer. "This is unbelievable," Leo murmured, his voice filled with wonder. Ella nodded, unable to tear her eyes away from the scene in front of her. The colors, the light, the very air, they were all so alive, so full of power and mystery. She could feel it in her chest, in her heart, a deep, resonating energy that seemed to call to her, urging her forward, pulling her toward the center of the cavern. They both stepped further into the cavern, the ground beneath them covered in a soft layer of frost that crunched beneath their boots. The closer they got to the center, the more intense the light became, almost blinding in its brilliance. But it wasn't just the light that drew them in. It was the sense of purpose, the feeling that this was the moment they had been preparing for, the culmination of everything that had led them here. The mountain had chosen them for a reason, and they were about to discover what that reason was. At the center of the cavern, there was a raised platform, surrounded by a circle of large, jagged crystals. The platform was like an altar, the stone carved with intricate runes and symbols that Ella couldn't begin to understand. Atop the platform was a deep indentation, perfectly shaped to hold the vial they had carried with them, the vial filled with the glowing liquid the woman had given them. The liquid had pulsed softly in their hands during their journey, and now, in the heart of the mountain, it seemed to glow even brighter, almost as though it recognized where it was meant to go. Ella looked at Leo, her hand trembling slightly as she held the vial. "This is it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is the moment." Leo gave her a small nod, his expression serious but filled with a quiet resolve. "We've come this far. We can't turn back now. Together, they approached the platform. Ella gently placed the vial into the indentation, and as soon as it touched the stone, the liquid inside began to shimmer, swirling in patterns of green and blue. The moment the vial settled, the entire cavern seemed to react. The crystals around them pulsed in unison, their light intensifying until it filled the space with a radiant glow that was almost blinding. The hum in the air grew louder, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. Then, with a sudden, overwhelming surge of energy, the mountain trembled beneath them. The ground shook violently, and a low rumble echoed through the cavern, as though the entire mountain was awakening from a long slumber. The crystals around them seemed to come to life, their surfaces rippling as if they were alive, responding to the energy now coursing through the cavern. The light from the auroras above intensified, casting kaleidoscopic patterns across the walls and ceiling, and the air itself felt alive with power, thick with the force of something ancient and unknowable. Ella stumbled back, her heart pounding in her chest as the cavern seemed to shift around them. The vibrations grew stronger, and for a moment, she felt as though she might be swept away by the sheer force of the energy that was building in the air. She reached out for Leo, and he grasped her hand tightly, his grip steady, his eyes locked onto the center of the cavern, where the vial had begun to glow with an otherworldly brilliance. And then, as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The trembling ceased. The hum faded to nothing. The light, which had been blinding just moments ago, softened to a gentle glow, and the crystals returned to their steady, rhythmic pulse. In the silence that followed, Ella and Leo stood frozen, their breaths shallow as they tried to process what had just happened. The cavern around them was still, but it was no longer the same. The air felt lighter, the energy that had once pulsed so fiercely now calm, as though the mountain had exhaled, releasing the tension that had built up. Ella looked down at the platform, where the vial had been, now empty. The stone beneath it glowed softly, its runes shimmering with a faint light. For a moment, she thought she saw the faintest flicker of movement in the air, like a shadow passing through the space between the crystals, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "We did it," Leo said quietly, his voice full of awe. Ella nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in the air, something deep and profound. The mountain had kept its secrets for so long, but now, as they stood in the heart of it, she felt as though they had unlocked a door, one that led to something far greater than they could understand. A soft breeze stirred through the cavern, carrying with it the faintest echo of the melody they had heard earlier, the same tune that had led them here. It was as if the mountain itself was singing to them, thanking them for what they had done. But they both knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The journey ahead would be just as unpredictable, just as dangerous, as the one that had brought them here. But for now, they had completed the task set before them. The mountain had spoken, and they had listened. And as they turned to leave the cavern, the light of the aurora swirling above them, they knew that whatever lay ahead would change them forever. When they opened their eyes, they were no longer standing in the cavern, no longer surrounded by the ethereal glow of the auroras or the humming energy of the mountain. The air was different now, fresher, lighter, and with a faint scent of pine. They were back on the familiar trail they had started from, the snow still crunching beneath their boots, the forest around them quiet and still, just as it had been when they first ventured into the mysterious woods. For a moment, they stood there, disoriented, blinking against the sudden change. The feeling of the cavern, the light, the magic, they were all gone, replaced by the ordinary silence of the forest. Ella took a deep breath, trying to calm the rush of emotions flooding through her. It didn't make sense. Had it all been a dream? A hallucination? But no, she could still feel the tingling energy in her fingertips, the faint trace of magic that lingered in the air even now. And then she heard it, a voice, cheerful and familiar. "You made it," one of the campers called out, waving at them from just a few feet away. A tall man with a beard, wearing a thick winter jacket and a beanie, grinned at them as though they had just returned from a short hike rather than a life-altering adventure. Ella and Leo exchanged a confused glance. The campers, they hadn't been there before. Had they? They couldn't remember. "Yeah," Leo said, his voice thick with disbelief, "I think we did." The other camper, a woman with a warm smile and bright eyes, stepped forward, her arms crossed casually over her chest. "We were starting to think you two had gotten lost for good. What happened? The trail's supposed to loop back around here." Ella shook her head, still trying to process what had just happened. The mountain, the ice tree, the mysterious woman with the harp, the vial, the light, the strange creatures. Had it all really been real? Or was it just some kind of shared dream between them? Leo chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. I think we took a wrong turn. The campers exchanged puzzled looks. A wrong turn? You guys look like you've been on an epic journey or something. Where'd you end up? What did you find out there? The woman asked, her curiosity piqued. Ella looked at Leo again, the same questions silently passing between them. Should they tell them? How could they explain the impossible? How could they describe the magical realm they had just walked through? They were just two regular hikers again, standing on a trail, with no evidence of what had just happened. The vast forest around them seemed normal again, no sign of the strange phenomena that had surrounded them before. I don't even know where to begin, Ella said, laughing softly, the sound a little shaky. You wouldn't believe it. Leo snorted, his laugh echoing in the stillness of the forest. You really wouldn't. They both stood there for a moment, silently processing the bizarre shift from their otherworldly experience back to the mundane. But then, something about the campers' smiling faces, their casual demeanor, made it all seem less strange, less impossible. Maybe they had just been through something incredible, something that only they could understand. And then, without warning, the laughter came. It bubbled up from deep within them, escaping as a shared burst of joy. The absurdity of it all, the way they had just crossed through an entirely different world and returned as if nothing had happened, it was almost too much to handle. They laughed, not just at the campers' confusion, but at the sheer, ridiculous magic of it all. Leo wiped a tear from his eye, still chuckling. I can't believe we're back here. We were just, what was it? Almost lost forever, or something. Ella, still laughing, nodded. Yeah. And now we're just back on a regular trail. Just another hike. They stood there for a few more moments, still laughing in disbelief, the weight of what they had just experienced beginning to settle into something deeper, something both joyful and bewildering. The mountain, the magic, the strange creatures and challenges, and now this, standing in front of two unsuspecting campers who had no idea what had just unfolded in the world beyond the trees. Finally, they took a deep breath and composed themselves, though a smile still tugged at their lips. The trail before them looked so ordinary now, so simple. And yet, in the back of their minds, they both knew, the world was far more extraordinary than they had ever imagined. They'd seen it with their own eyes. I think we need a drink, Leo said, still grinning, his voice full of wonder. Ella nodded in agreement, wiping away a final tear of laughter. Definitely. And maybe a nap. I feel like we've been gone for days. The campers exchanged amused glances, probably wondering what had caused their outburst of laughter, but neither of them seemed to press for more details. The two hikers were clearly happy, as if they'd just come back from an unforgettable adventure. And in a way, they had. As they walked back down the trail together, Ella and Leo remained silent for a while, still processing everything that had happened. The world around them seemed perfectly ordinary again, but they knew that it wasn't. Something had shifted, something they couldn't fully explain, but that was okay. They didn't need to. Because in their hearts, they knew one thing for sure. They had been to the very heart of something magical. And it would stay with them forever. Back at the campsite, the warm glow of the fire crackled in the still night air, casting flickering shadows across the snow-covered ground. Ella and Leo sat together on a log, each cradling a steaming mug of hot cocoa, its rich scent mingling with the crispness of the forest. The fire's warmth was a welcome contrast to the chill that still lingered in their bones, remnants of the strange, cold world they had just left behind. As they sipped their cocoa, they began to recount the tale of their journey, the story spilling out in fragments. Strange creatures, glowing lights, the mystical woman with her harp, and the magical task they had been given. Their words were slow at first, hesitant, as if they were still unsure how to piece it all together into something that made sense. They looked at one another, exchanging knowing glances, before continuing. I swear, the trees. They were breathing, Leo said, shaking his head in disbelief. And the ice creatures, they weren't just lights. They were alive. Tiny little frozen wings, moving like they had a mind of their own. Ella nodded, her eyes wide as she spoke. And the auroras, those colors in the sky, they weren't just reflections. It was like the whole mountain was alive. It was like stepping into another world, one that was so beautiful and so unreal. The two campers, sitting nearby and listening intently, exchanged skeptical glances. The tall man with the beard raised an eyebrow. "You guys really expect us to believe that? An ice harp, glowing creatures, trees that breathe." Ella and Leo paused, sharing a quick, knowing smile. The story they had just told was impossible to believe, they knew that. It sounded like something pulled from a dream, the kind of tale you'd tell around a campfire to amuse your friends. But the memory of it, the vivid, breathtaking moments they had shared in that strange world, was still so fresh in their minds. It wasn't a joke, it wasn't a fantasy, it had happened. "We didn't expect you to believe us," Leo said with a grin, his voice tinged with amusement. "But we know what we saw. And that's all that matters." Ella laughed softly, her breath forming clouds in the chilly night air. "Exactly. You can't really explain something like that. It's one of those things you just feel." The campers were silent for a moment, clearly unsure how to respond. Finally, the woman spoke up. "I don't know about glowing trees or magic, but I can tell you two are different after your hike. There's something in the way you talk, like you've seen something no one else has." Ella and Leo exchanged another glance, and for a brief moment, the weight of everything they had experienced settled over them once more. They hadn't just gone on a hike, they had crossed into another world, one filled with magic, wonder, and mysteries they might never fully understand. But they knew, without a doubt, that it was real. The world they had touched was still there, waiting, just beyond the ordinary path they walked every day. "You don't need to believe it," Ella said softly, her voice quiet but certain. "Because we know it's true. And that's enough for us." The fire crackled louder, the sound filling the space between them as they all sat in a comfortable silence, the only light coming from the dancing flames and the stars overhead. The auroras were visible again, faint streaks of green and purple shimmering high above in the sky, as if the mountain itself was still watching over them. Leo stretched out his legs and leaned back, looking up at the sky. "You know, I don't think I'll ever forget it. The feeling of it. The magic of the place. It's like it got into my bones, and now I can't shake it." Ella nodded, her thoughts wandering back to the icy trees, the strange creatures, and the woman with the glowing eyes. "Yeah. It was like we were part of something much bigger than ourselves. Like we were chosen to see it. And I don't know why. But I'm glad we did." For a while, the only sounds that filled the air were the occasional crack of the firewood and the distant calls of nocturnal creatures in the forest. But in the quiet moments, a deeper understanding settled between Ella and Leo. They didn't need anyone else to believe their story. They had lived it, and that was all that mattered. The rest of the world might never know the truth, might never understand the strange, magical place they had visited, but they would always carry it with them, a part of them, forever. As the fire flickered low, the stars above seeming to shine just a little brighter, they both sat in peaceful silence, wrapped in the warmth of the moment. They hadn't just survived their adventure, they had been changed by it. And no matter where they went from here, no matter how far they traveled or what they did, they would always remember the night they walked under the auroras, where the mountains whispered secrets, and magic was as real as the snow beneath their feet. Eventually, the campers stood up, yawning and stretching, ready to head to their tents. "Well, I guess if you two ever want to go on another adventure, just let us know," the man said with a chuckle, though his tone was lighthearted. "Though, I have to say, I'm not sure I'm ready to hear any more of those magical forest stories." Ella and Leo exchanged one last smile before settling back into the warmth of the fire. "We'll be sure to keep our next adventure a little more grounded," Leo said with a wink. But deep down, neither of them would ever forget the magic they had discovered in the heart of the mountain. The auroras, the frozen creatures, the mysterious woman. They were all part of a world they had touched, even if only for a brief, unforgettable moment. And as the fire crackled on and the night grew deeper, they sat quietly, knowing that some stories were meant to be shared only with those who were brave enough to believe in them, even if those stories would never be fully understood by anyone else. And as they drifted off to sleep, the soft murmur of the wind through the trees was the only sound that filled the air, a gentle lullaby that seemed to wrap around them like a comforting blanket. The warmth of the fire had faded into a soft, embers glow, but the cool night air still held the lingering magic of the mountain, of the strange, glowing creatures, and of the whispering auroras that had led them here. The auroras, still swirling above in the night sky, seemed to pulse with a life of their own, their colors rippling in waves, green, violet, and silver, like a living dream, casting their ethereal light over the entire forest. It was as if the mountains themselves were alive, breathing in time with the celestial dance above them. Each flicker of the auroras seemed to carry with it a secret, a memory, a promise that this place was more than just a mountain. It was a doorway to another world, a world hidden just beyond the ordinary. Leo, lying next to Ella, felt the pull of the lights above, a tug at the back of his mind. It was as though the auroras were calling to him, reminding him of the wonder he had seen, the magic that had touched his soul. He closed his eyes, but the images of the glowing ice creatures, the strange woman, and the mountain's heart, alive with light, still danced in his mind. His body ached from the journey, but his spirit felt lighter, freer, as if the weight of the world had somehow shifted during their time in the forest. Ella lay beside him, her eyes closed but her mind far from sleep. Her thoughts wandered back to the icy tree, the creatures, and the haunting music of the harp. There had been something ancient in that place, something powerful and timeless that spoke to her in a language that words could never capture. It was as if she had touched a forgotten part of herself, a piece of something greater, something that had always been there but had never fully revealed itself until now. The thought brought a small smile to her lips as she nestled deeper into her sleeping bag. The world outside seemed so distant, so far removed from the strange beauty they had just experienced. Here, beneath the stars and the swirling auroras, she felt at peace, as though the universe had shown her a glimpse of its soul, and in doing so, had freed her from the mundane worries of everyday life. They lay there in the silence, side by side, each lost in their own thoughts, yet somehow connected by the shared memory of their incredible journey. The world around them felt both vast and intimate, as if time had slowed, allowing them to savor every moment of this strange adventure. And as the night deepened, the auroras above began to shift once more, their colors dancing in ever-changing patterns, as if reflecting the dreams that were beginning to take root in their minds. The mountain, with its hidden secrets, had changed them. It had opened their eyes to a world beyond the one they knew, a world of wonder and possibility, of magic and mystery. As their breathing slowed and their minds began to slip into sleep, the night seemed to grow even more alive. The auroras, still swirling high above, were no longer just lights in the sky. They were the heartbeat of the mountain, the pulse of the world they had just visited, and a reminder that the journey, whether it was through the forests of the Aurora Mountains or through the mysteries of life itself, was never truly over. In that moment, as they drifted further into slumber, they knew that the adventure they had found wasn't just about the places they'd seen or the strange, magical creatures they'd encountered. It was about the feeling of losing yourself, of being drawn into something bigger, something that existed beyond the limits of everyday life. Sometimes, the best adventures were the ones you never planned, the ones that found you when you weren't looking, when you allowed yourself to be lost. And in the quiet, under the soft glow of the auroras, they both realized that perhaps the greatest adventure of all was the one that led you to rediscover the wonder in the world, and in yourself. The auroras above whispered that truth in their dreams, a soft, melodic reminder that some adventures, the most meaningful ones, could only be found by losing your way, and in doing so, finding a part of yourself you never knew was missing. With that thought, they finally surrendered to sleep, knowing that this adventure, this magical journey, would never truly end. It had become a part of them, a memory woven into the fabric of who they were. And so, under the endless sky, with the auroras dancing above and the mountains standing silent and timeless around them, Ella and Leo fell into a peaceful slumber, their hearts filled with the promise of more adventures yet to come.